The first trunk arrived at Eldmere Park before the woman did. It was carried through the front hall by 2 footmen, who had not been told where to look, because the brass label on its lid gave an instruction no servant wished to read aloud. Mrs. Isolde Carow, East Suite. Lady Cressida Winstanley saw the words from the upper landing, where she had paused with a folded household list in one hand and a basket of mended table linen in the other. For one still moment, the house seemed to hold its breath around her. The carved Penhaligon ring on her finger, plain gold worn thin at the underside, pressed into her skin as if it had suddenly remembered it was a chain. Eldmere Park, Hampshire, late spring of 1816, had been polished for its master's return. Silver had been rubbed until the candlesticks shone. The long windows in the dining room had been washed, fires had been laid, though the air did not require them, because Lord Godfrey Winstanley liked the appearance of warmth more than the trouble of giving it. Cressida had ordered the best linen brought down, the green drawing-room opened, and the south guest-rooms aired, for she had been told only that Lord Eldmere would return from London with important company. She had not been told his important company wore French scent, sent 3 trunks before her carriage, and had chosen rooms that belonged, by every courtesy of the house, to a wife. The footman set down the trunk beneath the stern Winstanley portraits. Old lords and powdered ladies looked down through varnished gloom, their painted eyes fixed forever upon land, lineage, and possession. Cressida looked at the label again. East Suite, blue sitting room, ladies' dressing room, not guest room, not spare chamber, not even the rose room at the far wing, where inconvenient relations were placed when one wished them comfortable but unseen. Her mouth went dry, but she did not move from the landing until Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, emerged from the servants' passage with a face so controlled it had become almost blank. "My lady," Mrs. Vale said softly. She did not finish. There were questions a housekeeper could not ask a mistress of the house, especially when mistress had become a word with 2 meanings. Cressida descended the stairs. She was 22 years old, and she had been Lady Eldmere since 17, or so every person in Hampshire had been taught to say. 5 years had trained her not to hurry when wounded. 5 years had taught her that if she ran, they would call it nerves. If she cried, they would call it weakness. If she protested too soon, they would call it jealousy, before they called it truth. She stopped beside the trunk and laid the household list upon it, as if she had meant to inspect delivery all along. "The East Suite is not prepared for a guest, Mrs. Vale." "No, my lady, then it cannot receive one." The footman stared at the floor. Behind her, the youngest housemaid drew in a quick breath, then swallowed it. Cressida heard the sound and chose not to turn. Mercy, in a house like Eldmere, often meant pretending one had not seen fear. "Place Mrs. Carow in the rose room until Lord Eldmere gives his direct instruction in writing," Cressida said. "The East Suite remains closed." Mrs. Vale's eyes flicked once toward the front door. "His lordship has already sent word." Cressida held out her hand. "Then I will read it." There was no letter. There was only the label. That was how Godfrey preferred his cruelties, not as commands one might preserve, but as arrangements everyone was expected to understand. The front doors opened before Cressida could speak again. Rain had not fallen, yet the air that entered with Lord Eldmere felt damp and cold, like a cellar unlocked after years. Godfrey Winstanley stepped into his ancestral hall, with the careless assurance of a man who believed every room had waited to forgive him. He was handsome in the pale, polished manner that had impressed Cressida's father when she was 17. Fair hair, fine gloves, perfect waistcoat, eyes that could look gentle when they wanted advantage and empty when they had already obtained it. Behind him came Mrs. Isolde Carow in a travelling pelisse the colour of cream, one gloved hand resting lightly on the arm of a maid. She was not young enough to be mistaken for innocence, nor old enough to have surrendered ambition. She was beautiful in the London way, deliberate and expensive, with a mouth trained to smile before it struck. "Cressida," Godfrey said, as if surprised to find his wife in her own hall. "You have received Mrs. Carow's things." "Some of them," Cressida answered. "They were incorrectly labelled." Isolde's smile deepened by a fraction. How distressing. London packers are so bold with chalk these days. These labels are brass. The silence after that was small but sharp. Godfrey removed his gloves slowly. "Mrs. Carow will use the East Suite." "The East Suite is not a guest apartment. It will be today." Cressida felt every servant listening. She saw the butler's hand tighten around the salver. She saw Mrs. Vale's chin lift one cautious inch, as if willing strength into her. She thought of the morning she had come to this house after the chapel ceremony. 17, pale with duty, still smelling of beeswax and wilted orange blossom. No mother beside her, no certificate placed in her hand, no husband waiting at the threshold with warmth. Only Godfrey saying, "You will learn the house soon enough." She had learned it. She had learned which doors stuck in damp weather, which tenants were always late because their roofs leaked, which servants sent half their wages to mothers in villages no guest ever named. She had learned Godfrey's absence, his debts, his silences, his annual returns, with new perfumes clinging to his coat. But she had never learned how to stop being surprised by the precision with which he could make humiliation sound like household management. "If Mrs. Carow is a guest," Cressida said, "she will be received as one. If she is not, then you may wish to explain her position before the staff you have asked to serve her." Godfrey's eyes cooled. "You mistake yourself." "No," she said quietly. "I am trying not to mistake her." Isolde laughed, a bright drawing-room sound in a hall too old for it. "Lord Eldmere warned me you were formal." Cressida looked at her then. "Did he also warn you that formalities are sometimes the last mercy left to a household?" The colour shifted in Isolde's face. "Not much. Enough." Godfrey stepped closer. He did not touch Cressida. He had not touched her in years, except when society required the appearance of escort. Yet the nearness of him was a pressure, an old lesson repeated without words. "You will not embarrass me before my guest. I would not dream of taking from you what you have brought home yourself." The butler made the smallest sound, almost a cough. Godfrey heard it. His gaze moved from Cressida to the servants, and his irritation hardened into punishment. "Very well. Mrs. Carow shall be shown to the East Suite, because I command it. You will receive her at dinner as my dearest guest. You will see that her comfort is treated as my own." Isolde lowered her lashes, triumphant enough to pretend modesty. Cressida's hand tightened around the household list until the paper creased. The ring bit deeper. She did not look down at it. "As you wish, my lord," she said, "but the household books will record the change." Godfrey frowned. "What household books?" "The ones that make rooms, wages, linen, candles, and expenses visible." "You have become tedious in my absence." "No," Cressida said, "only accurate." His mouth moved as if he might answer, but Isolde touched his sleeve. It was light, possessive, public. The gesture moved through the hall more loudly than a slap, though no sound accompanied it. Godfrey allowed the touch to remain. "Come, Isolde," he said. "You must be tired from the road." He did not ask whether Cressida had been tired from 5 years. He did not ask whether the house he entered had been kept by the woman he intended to displace. He merely led Mrs. Carrow toward the staircase, and Cressida stood aside because if she did not, every servant would be forced to watch a battle she could not yet win. Isolde paused on the first step, close enough for Cressida to smell violet water and travel dust. "You have such a handsome house, Lady Eldmere." "It belongs to Lord Eldmere." "Of course." Isolde's eyes dropped to Cressida's ring. "And yet some things do cling." She went upstairs laughing softly. At dinner, Godfrey placed Isolde on his right. Cressida sat at the far end of the table, where the mistress of the house had always sat when presiding. But tonight, the distance looked less like rank than exile. The candles reflected in the crystal. The soup was served without a spill. The footman moved with the exact discipline that grief sometimes borrows from ceremony. Godfrey spoke of London, of clubs, of a spring assembly he intended to host, of county families who would be delighted to find Eldmere Park lively again. Isolde asked whether the blue sitting room might be hung with lighter curtains. "It has been a little severe," she said, "like a room waiting for someone who never came." Cressida lifted her spoon. Her hand did not tremble. That was something. "The blue curtains belonged to Lady Eldmere before me," she said. "Then perhaps they have served long enough." Godfrey smiled at Isolde as if Cressida had not spoken. "Change them if you like." Mrs. Vale, standing near the sideboard, went still. Cressida saw it. She also saw Lucy, the youngest maid, nearly drop a plate when Isolde asked whether the household always moved so slowly. "Lucy has been on her feet since dawn," Cressida said. "Then she should be grateful to sit later," Isolde replied. "Servants do, eventually. Not if the bell is pulled all night." Godfrey set down his glass. Cressida. Her name in his mouth was a warning dressed as civility. She looked at him across the long table, past the silver, past the flowers she had ordered cut that morning, past the woman sitting where confidence had been invited to replace fidelity. "Yes, my lord, you will make Mrs. Carrow welcome." Cressida folded her napkin once, neatly, slowly. "Eldmere Park has rules, madam, even for guests." Isolde's smile vanished. Godfrey leaned back, studying Cressida as if she had become an unfamiliar document. For the first time that evening, a thin satisfaction moved through her, not happiness, not victory, but the knowledge that she had not entirely disappeared. After dinner, while Godfrey escorted Isolde toward the drawing room and left Cressida to dismiss the servants, Cressida stepped into the small passage beside the butler's pantry and opened the household account book kept beneath a stack of linen orders. Her fingers found the margin beside the day's date. She dipped the pen herself. Mrs. Isolde Carrow arrived at Eldmere Park with trunks labeled for East Suite, blue sitting room, and ladies' dressing room, before consent of Lady Eldmere was requested or obtained. She sanded the ink, closed the book, and slid it back into place. It was not rebellion yet. It was memory made visible. In a house where everyone pretended not to see, that was dangerous enough. When she returned to the hall, Godfrey was waiting beneath the portrait of his grandfather. Isolde had gone ahead, humming somewhere beyond the drawing-room doors. "You have grown inconvenient," he said. Cressida kept her hands folded so he would not see the ring mark reddening her finger, only observant. His gaze dropped then, as if the ring had called to him. The gold caught the candlelight. Once, at 17, she had believed it meant she had been chosen. Later, she had learned it meant she had been kept. Godfrey looked at it for a long moment. Then he smiled without warmth. "By tomorrow," he said, "that will no longer be necessary." By morning, the east suite had curtains of pale damask laid across its chairs. Though Cressida had not ordered them removed from storage, she saw them when she passed the open door on her way to breakfast. The old blue hangings folded on the floor like something dismissed without ceremony. A maid knelt beside them, with tears standing in her eyes, trying to smooth the creases before anyone accused her of neglect. Cressida stopped only long enough to say, "Wrap Lady Eldmere's curtains in linen, not paper. They are not rubbish." The maid nodded quickly. The words were small. They were also all Cressida could safely give. Below stairs, the house had already changed its breathing. Bells rang more often. Footsteps moved faster. Mrs. Caro's woman had complained of the scent of beeswax in the corridor, the stiffness of the pillows, the lack of fresh violets at dawn. Godfrey's valet had demanded brandy before breakfast. In the dining room, Cressida found the place settings altered. Isolde sat where Godfrey's mother had once sat during house parties, to his right and slightly nearer the fire. Cressida's place remained at the far end, correct in form, stripped of meaning. A letter lay beside Godfrey's plate, unopened. Another rested near the sideboard on a small salver, sealed in dark red wax, addressed to Lord Eldmere, in a firm hand Cressida did not recognize. Godfrey ignored both. "There you are," he said, as if she were late, though the clock had not yet struck 9. "Mrs. Caro and I have been discussing the spring assembly." Isolde lifted her teacup. She wore mourning muslin with a ribbon threaded beneath her breast, and a small expression of victory that needed no ribbon at all. "Lord Eldmere thinks the county must see the house awake again." "The house has not been asleep," Cressida said, taking her seat. "No?" Isolde glanced toward the windows. "How fortunate. I had mistaken silence for neglect." Godfrey smiled. "The assembly will correct that. Mrs. Caro will preside over the arrangements." The butler, standing by the sideboard, did not move. Mrs. Vale was not in the room, but Cressida felt the absence of her steady presence, like a missing rail on a staircase. "Preside," Cressida repeated. "In what capacity?" Godfrey cut into the ham before him. "The capacity I grant. Assemblies in a private house require a hostess." "Precisely." Isolde set down her cup. "You need not trouble yourself. I have a gift for such things." Cressida looked from Isolde to Godfrey, then to the unopened red-sealed letter. Something in the seal caught the light. A ducal crest, perhaps. A crowned beast. Too small to read at that distance, Godfrey noticed her glance and turned the letter face down with 2 fingers. "Your concern with papers has become tiresome. Papers have the benefit of remembering what people later deny." His knife stilled. Isolde's eyes sharpened with interest. Cressida felt the ring on her hand beneath the table, hidden in the fold of her napkin. It had left a tender ridge at the base of her finger overnight. She had slept little. Godfrey's last words had followed her from corridor to chamber, from candle to dark, from dark to dawn. By tomorrow that will no longer be necessary. Now tomorrow had arrived and sat across from her with buttered toast. Godfrey leaned back. "Hold out your hand." The room did not change, and yet it did. The footman at the door lowered his gaze. Isolde's smile became very still. Cressida placed her left hand upon the tablecloth, palm down. The plain gold ring caught the weak morning sun. It was not ornate. Godfrey had not wasted diamonds upon a girl whose dowry mattered more than her delight. The gold band was narrow and smooth, engraved within, though she had not seen that inner inscription since the day it had been placed upon her finger. C.P. to G.W., April 1811. She remembered because she had searched it later in private, hoping for tenderness hidden where no one else could see. "Remove it," Godfrey said. No one breathed loudly enough to be blamed for listening. Cressida looked at him. "Why? Because it gives a false impression." For a moment, the room seemed to recede to the edges of her sight, silver blurred. Porcelain paled, Isolde's cream sleeve, Godfrey's pale hand, the white tablecloth. All of it became one colorless wash around the circle of gold on her finger. "False," Cressida said. Her voice came out steady. That surprised her. "Yes." Godfrey sipped his coffee. "You have never understood proportion, Cressida. A ring suggests privileges and claims no longer suitable to the harmony of this house." Isolde touched the pearls at her throat. "It's only a symbol, surely." "Symbols are rarely only anything," Cressida said. Godfrey's eyes narrowed. "Do not make a scene." "I have made none." "Then remove it." She looked at the ring again, and the girl of 17 looked back from its dull shine. That girl had stood in a private chapel beside a man who smelled faintly of cold rain and impatience. She had heard a clergyman's voice. She had heard her father clear his throat behind her. She had waited for someone to say this was too quick, too quiet, too empty of blessing. No one had. Afterward, no certificate had been handed to her. No mother had kissed her. No husband had warmed her hands. Only this ring had told her something irrevocable had occurred. For 5 years, society had used it to name her wife. Now Godfrey wished to use its removal to make her less than that before a guest. Cressida placed her other hand beside the first, not to obey, but to still herself. "If I am not your wife in public, my lord, what was I at 17? The footman at the door forgot to look away. Isolde's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Godfrey's color altered, not much, but enough for Cressida to see that her question had struck some door he preferred locked. "You were fortunate," he said. "That is not an answer. You were rescued from your father's debts. That is not a vow. You were given position. That is not a marriage." He rose so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. Isolde flinched, then recovered herself. But Cressida did not move. She had learned long ago that Godfrey preferred her fear quiet and convenient. Today she would give him quiet, but not convenience. "Take off the ring," he said, each word polished to a dangerous softness. No. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It stood between them with more strength than she felt in her knees. Godfrey came around the table. "You forget yourself." "I remember myself precisely. That is the difficulty." His hand reached toward hers. Before his fingers touched her, another voice spoke from the doorway. "That will be far enough." The room froze. Cressida turned her head. A gentleman stood just inside the dining room. Hat in one hand, riding gloves in the other, travel dust still faint upon the hem of his dark coat. He was tall, severe, and composed in the way of men, accustomed to having every room rearrange itself around their arrival. His hair was black, with a slight wave brushed back from a high brow. His eyes were grey, not soft, not warm at first glance, but startlingly attentive. They took in Godfrey's position beside Cressida, Isolde's seat, the ring on the tablecloth, the servant's silence, and the red-sealed letter lying face down by Godfrey's plate. Then they returned to Cressida's hand. Not to her face first, not to her beauty, not to whatever story Godfrey had prepared, to the hand that had been ordered bare. Godfrey's jaw tightened. Alderwick. Isolde lowered her cup with care. The title moved through the room before anyone said it fully. Leopold Armitage, Duke of Alderwick. Cressida knew the name as one knew weather over distant hills. Powerful, cold, capable of ruining harvests if it turned. She had heard Godfrey curse it once in connection with a debt note and an estate boundary dispute he claimed was beneath ducal interference. Now the Duke stood in Eldmere Park's dining room at breakfast, and beneath his silence, Godfrey looked suddenly less like master of the house than a man caught misplacing another man's property. The Duke stepped farther in. "Your servant informed me you were at breakfast. I was not aware I would be interrupting an inquiry into Lady Eldmere's hand." "You are early," Godfrey said. "Evidently not." The Duke placed his gloves upon the edge of the table, not on Cressida's hand, not touching her. Close enough that black leather lay beside pale fingers and plain gold, a line drawn without contact. Cressida felt the nearness of that gesture more sharply than a touch. He had not seized her defense from her. He had made space around it. "This is a domestic matter," Godfrey said. "No," the Duke replied. "A domestic matter is whether the coffee is cold. This is coercion with witnesses." Isolde rose halfway. "Your Grace, surely Lord Eldmere may decide what symbols are suitable in his own house." The Duke did not look away from Godfrey. A house is not made honourable by permitting its master to humiliate a woman before breakfast. Godfrey's face hardened. "You exceed courtesy. I was invited to examine your accounts. I arrived to find you attempting to strip your wife of evidence." Cressida's breath caught on that last word. Evidence, not ornament, not claim, not shame. Evidence. The Duke's eyes moved to her at last. He did not smile. He did not soften his voice into pity. "Lady Eldmere, did you choose to remove that ring?" "No, Your Grace." "Did Lord Eldmere ask privately?" "No." "Did he explain the legal purpose for requiring it?" Godfrey snapped. "There is no legal purpose." The Duke's gaze returned to him. "That is the first clear thing you have said." Isolde's hand tightened at her pearls. "It's only a ring," Cressida heard herself answer, almost before she knew she would speak. "Then it should not frighten anyone." Silence filled the room. The Duke's eyes changed. Not warmth, not yet, but recognition. He had noticed not merely that she had been wounded, but that she had remained exact. That small perception unsettled her more than Godfrey's anger. It reached a part of her that had learned to live unseen, and found, against its will, that it had been seen. Godfrey took one step back, aware now of the servants, the guest, the Duke, the dangerous shape of the scene. Cressida is overwrought. Lady Eldmere appears composed. She has always performed composure well. "And you have always mistaken performance for permission?" Godfrey's lips thinned. "You have no authority over my wife." The Duke picked up one glove and set it down again, very slowly, beside the ring. "No, but I have rank enough to prevent a public wrong from being completed in my presence. I also have enough interest in your accounts to ask why you are so eager to remove a symbol attached to a ceremony that brought money into this house." Cressida looked at Godfrey. For the first time, she saw not irritation but alarm. It passed quickly. It had been there. The Duke had seen it too. "You will leave," Godfrey said. "After breakfast?" the Duke asked. "Unlikely." Then he looked at Cressida, and his voice changed only in its precision. "Lady Eldmere, you are not required to surrender that ring to anyone at this table." She swallowed. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Do not thank me for stating what should have been obvious. That should have sounded cold. Instead, it sounded like anger on her behalf, held carefully behind a locked door." Godfrey gave a short laugh. "How noble! Will you also claim her nerves, her ledgers, and her sulks as evidence?" The Duke's face became still. "No, that ring is evidence, and Lady Cressida is under my protection now. Mine, The word struck the room like a door closing against a storm. Cressida should have hated it. She had spent 5 years being kept, managed, placed, displayed, ignored. Yet the Duke's mind did not fall over her like a cage. It stood before her like a shield, and because he had not touched her, because he had asked what she chose, because his glove lay near her hand without imprisoning it, she understood the difference even before she trusted it. Godfrey went white around the mouth. Isolde's chair creaked as she sat back down. The servants did not move. Cressida kept her hand on the table, ring still on her finger, and lifted her chin. "Protection is not marriage, Your Grace," Isolde said at last, her voice sweet with poison. The Duke turned to her then. "No, Mrs. Carrow, but it may be the first honest thing this room has seen in years." The word mine remained in the dining room after the Duke had spoken it, not as warmth, not yet as tenderness, but as a fact so heavy that even Godfrey did not immediately dare move it aside. Cressida sat with her left hand still upon the tablecloth, the ring still on her finger, the Duke's black glove still near enough to mark the distance he had chosen not to cross. She could hear the soft crackle of the fire behind Isolde, the faint tick of the mantel clock, and somewhere beyond the passage, the urgent hush of servants, pretending not to have heard their master corrected by a greater man. Godfrey recovered first. Men like him always did. They had trained themselves to turn shame into accusation before anyone could name it. "Your Grace mistakes theatrical timing for authority," he said. "If you have come about the Alderwick note, I will receive you in the library after breakfast. My wife's temperament is not among the securities attached to my debts." "No," the Duke replied, "but the household that supported those debts appears attached to her labor, her silence, and possibly her dowry. That interests me." Isolde rose with a rustle of muslin. "Lord Eldmere, I don't think I can remain while Lady Eldmere is encouraged in this display." Cressida looked at the other woman then, truly looked, and saw the calculation beneath the wounded tone. Isolde did not fear scandal. She feared being present when scandal chose a different victim. "You may leave, Mrs. Carrow," Cressida said. "The East Suite has been prepared for you without my approval. It would be a pity not to admire the curtains." Isolde's eyes flashed. Godfrey's hand tightened around the back of the chair beside him. The Duke did not smile, but his attention shifted to Cressida with a quiet exactness that unsettled her more than praise would have done. It was not delight at her sharpness, it was recognition of restraint. He saw that she had not struck wildly. She had placed the blade where it belonged. "Lady Eldmere," he said, "there is a morning room along the east corridor." Cressida blinked once. "Yes, Your Grace." "Is there a respectable older woman in this house whom you trust to attend you there?" The question pierced her more gently than kindness. He had not said, "Come with me." He had not said, "I will take you away." He had asked whether the house contained a witness she trusted, as if her comfort and propriety were not inconveniences but terms. "Mrs. Vale," Cressida said, "the housekeeper." "Then Mrs. Vale should attend you. I will speak with Lord Eldmere here." Godfrey laughed. "You will do no such thing. Cressida will remain where I place her." Cressida drew her hand back from the table and laid it in her lap before Godfrey could turn his command into contact. The ring scraped lightly against the edge of her napkin. "No," she said. The word felt different the second time. Not larger, more practiced. "I will go to the morning room." Godfrey stared at her as if she had changed shape. "You will ask my leave." "I asked it at 17, she said, standing slowly. "I have been paying for the answer ever since." A pulse of silence followed. She did not know why she said it. She did not know whether it was wise. But once spoken, the truth stood upright in the room, and she could not make herself apologize for its posture. The Duke moved first, not toward her, but toward the door. He positioned himself where Godfrey would have to pass him to follow. It was done without drama. A man accustomed to rank did not need to raise his voice when the space itself obeyed him. "Mrs. Vale," he said to the butler, "if you please." The butler bowed so quickly that relief broke through training for half a second. He went. Isolde gathered her shawl and looked at Cressida with a softness meant to wound. "You must be exhausted. I suppose scenes do take strength." Cressida turned from the table. "Then I congratulate you on your constitution, madam." The Duke lowered his eyes briefly, perhaps to hide a reaction, perhaps only to observe that Godfrey had taken one furious step and stopped. Mrs. Vale appeared within moments, breath controlled, cap perfectly straight, face pale. "My lady, you will come with me to the morning room," Cressida said, "and bring the small household account book from the sideboard." Godfrey's head snapped toward her. "You will bring nothing." There it was. Too quick, too sharp. The Duke heard it. Cressida saw him hear it. "The household account book is not a jewel," she said. "No," Godfrey replied. "It is mine. Then it is fortunate I have kept it legible." She stepped toward the sideboard. Her knees felt strangely distant, as if they belonged to the girl who had once walked down a chapel aisle without understanding that silence could be arranged as thoroughly as flowers. The account book lay beneath a folded damask cloth where she had returned it the night before. Her fingers slid under the linen. Godfrey came forward. The Duke did not touch him. He merely said, "Lord Eldmere." A warning could be quieter than a shout. Godfrey stopped. Cressida drew out the book. Its brown leather cover was plain, its corners worn from years of use. Nothing in its appearance suggested danger. That was why men like Godfrey underestimated records kept by women. Linen, candles, wages, coal, soap, guest rooms, parish gifts, the small repeated facts by which a house revealed its soul. She held it against her side. "Now you steal from me before a duke," Godfrey said. "No," Cressida answered. "I preserve what I wrote." "What you wrote?" Isolde asked from near the door. "How industrious." The Duke's eyes moved to the book. "You made a note last night," Cressida said, "of Mrs. Caro's arrival. Her trunks were labelled for rooms before I was informed." Isolde's expression changed, then smoothed. Godfrey noticed the change and turned his anger fully upon Cressida. "You have become a spy in my house. I have been a wife in it. The two positions are not always as different as gentlemen suppose." Mrs. Vale made a small sound, almost pain, almost pride. Cressida looked at her and softened her voice. "Come." She walked to the door. The Duke stepped aside first for her, then for Mrs. Vale. He did not offer his arm in the room. It would have made gossip too easy and gratitude too complicated. Yet, as she passed him, the edge of the account book brushed the back of his glove. A near touch only, leather to leather, not skin to skin. Still, Cressida felt the difference between Godfrey's commands and the Duke's restraint with a clarity that made her chest ache. The Duke looked down at the book, then at her. "My carriage is at the front," he said quietly enough that Godfrey could not pretend not to hear. "If you wish to leave this house, it will be made ready. If you wish to remain under Mrs. Vale's eye while matters are examined, that too will be respected." Cressida paused in the threshold. Every servant in the passage had vanished from sight, which meant every servant was listening from somewhere. Godfrey had called her wife for 5 years, when it suited accounts, invitations, and appearances. Now another man offered her a choice and did not dress it as mercy. That was more frightening than command. A command could be resisted. A choice asked her to know herself. "Only to the morning room for now," she said. "I won't be carried out of my own life before I know what has been done to it." Something shifted in the Duke's face then, brief and deeply controlled. Respect, perhaps, or pain recognized from a distance. "Then the morning room," he said, "and no farther than you permit." She went. Mrs. Vale followed, closing the door softly behind them. But not before Cressida heard Godfrey's voice turn low and vicious. "You interfere at your peril, Alderwick." The Duke answered with a calm that made the threat seem poorly dressed. "I have survived better men's displeasure." In the morning room, sunlight fell across yellow walls, and a small pianoforte. No one played. Cressida stood in the center of the carpet, with the account book pressed to her ribs. Mrs. Vale shut the door, and then, only then, allowed her face to change. "My lady, are you harmed?" "No." Cressida looked down at her hand. The ring remained there. Her finger was reddened beneath it, but the band had not moved. "No, I am not harmed." It was not true in the way physicians meant truth. It was true enough for the morning. She crossed to the writing table and opened the account book, where the previous day's ink had dried. Mrs. Isolde Carow arrived at Eldmere Park with trunks labelled for East Suite, blue sitting room, and ladies' dressing room before consent of Lady Eldmere was requested or obtained. Beneath it, on the next page, a line of older entries caught her attention because she had once wondered at them, and then forced herself not to wonder further. April 1811. Payment to Reverend N. Bell. Special license arrangement. Private performance. She stared at the last two words until the room seemed to narrow around them. Private performance. Not ceremony, not service, not marriage. Performance. Mrs. Vale came closer. "My lady?" Cressida touched the page with one finger, careful not to smudge ink 5 years old. "Do you remember the clergyman who married me?" Mrs. Vale's face went still. "I was not permitted in the chapel." "Were you told his name?" "No, my lady. Only that Lord Eldmere had arranged everything. Everything." The word had always sounded like efficiency. Now it sounded like concealment. Footsteps approached in the corridor. Not hurried, measured. The Duke knocked once. He did not enter until Mrs. Vale opened the door, and Cressida inclined her head. Godfrey was not with him. That alone told its own story. "Lady Eldmere," the Duke said. "Lord Eldmere insists the account book belongs to him." Cressida turned the open page toward him. Then perhaps he should have read it more carefully. The Duke came no closer than the edge of propriety allowed, but his eyes found the line. Payment to Reverend N. Bell. Special license arrangement. Private performance. He read it once, then again. His expression did not change, yet the air around him did. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. Cressida looked at the ring on her hand. The gold seemed suddenly less like proof, and more like a question that had been wearing her for 5 years. "No," she said. "But I think Lord Eldmere does." The first hour at Havenholt Abbey did not feel like rescue. It felt like being carried from one locked room into another where the locks were hidden behind courtesy. Cressida understood the difference, and because she understood it, she was careful not to mistake clean linen, quiet servants, and a ducal carriage for freedom. She had left Eldmere Park before noon in the Duke of Alderwick's carriage, with Mrs. Vale seated beside her and the brown household account book. Wrapped in a folded shawl upon her lap, the ring remained on her finger. The strange words remained open in her mind. Private performance. Godfrey had not followed them to the door. He had stood at the head of the stairs with Isolde behind him, his face composed and his eyes full of the kind of anger that waited for witnesses to disappear. The Duke had not offered his arm when Cressida entered the carriage. He had opened the door, stepped back, and said only, "You may stop the journey at any point, Lady Eldmere." It was so unlike a command that she had nearly wept, and she'd disliked him a little for giving her that danger. Havenholt Abbey rose from Oxfordshire stone in the late afternoon, broad and pale, beneath a sky washed thin with spring light. It was older than Eldmere, but less oppressive. Its windows did not seem to watch. Its front steps had been scrubbed that morning, and the woman waiting there, beneath a dark shawl, had the upright posture of one born to authority and too intelligent to waste it on display. "Lady Cressida," she said as Cressida descended, "I am Dowager Lady Armitage. You will be received here as a gentlewoman under my roof, and no one in this house will ask you a question you have not first been seated to answer." That was when Cressida's composure almost failed, not at Godfrey's cruelty, not at Isolde's smile, at a chair offered before interrogation. She curtsied because habit steadied her. "You are very kind, my lady." The dowager's eyes moved briefly to the ring, then away with practiced mercy. "Kindness is useful only when organized. Come inside, Mr." Thouless arrived before the tea cooled. He was a narrow, grey-haired solicitor with careful hands and a face built for discretion. The Duke entered the drawing-room with him, but remained standing near the mantel until the dowager told him, without looking up from the teapot, that looming was not a legal method. He moved to the window. Cressida noticed that he did not sit near her. He did not make the room whisper. He made it safer by refusing to perform intimacy where none had been granted. Mr. Thouless placed the account book on the small round table between them. "With your permission, Lady Eldmere, I must ask about the ceremony in April of 1811. Cressida heard the title and felt a sudden coldness move through her. Lady Eldmere, the name everyone gave her, perhaps without knowing whether it belonged to her at all. "I was 17, she said. "My father, Sir Ranulph Penhaligon, told me the match was necessary. My mother was ill, not merely indisposed. She was dying, though no one said it plainly to me then. Lord Godfrey Winstanley came to Penhaligon House twice before the ceremony. He spoke to my father, not to me." The Duke's hand tightened once around the back of a chair. He did not interrupt. "The chapel was small," Cressida continued. "Near Eldmere, not at our parish. I remember beeswax, damp stone, and a clergyman whose name I did not catch. My father stood behind me. Lord Godfrey was impatient. He looked at his watch before the vows. Afterward, he put this ring on my hand. There was no breakfast, no announcement beyond what was sent later. No certificate was placed in my keeping." Mr. Thouless made a note. "Were banns called?" "I was told there was a special license." "Were you shown it?" "No." "Did you sign a register?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. The answer should have been simple. For 5 years, she had believed memory would support the life built upon it. Instead, memory shifted like a carpet over uneven boards. "I think I signed something, a parish register. I do not know. It was a narrow book, or perhaps a paper placed upon one. I remember Lord Godfrey saying there was no need to blot it myself because the ink had been prepared." "Prepared," Mr. Thouless repeated softly. The Duke turned from the window. "Do not press her faster than memory allows." Cressida looked at him before she could stop herself. His voice had been quiet, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Not impatience with her, with the world that had required a 17-year-old girl, to defend the shape of a document she had been too frightened to examine. Mr. Thewlis bowed his head. "Of course, Your Grace." "No," Cressida said. "Ask. I would rather answer pain than continue living inside fog." The Duke met her eyes then. Something moved there, not pity, not admiration exactly, but a recognition so grave it felt like a hand held out and not yet offered. "That is a braver preference than most people make," he said. It was too much. Not the words, but the steadiness behind them. Cressida looked down at her hands. The ring mark showed red around the gold. It had pressed into her flesh for so long that the skin beneath seemed to have accepted its own diminishment. "It is not brave to be tired of darkness." "It can be," the Duke said. The Dowager poured tea with a deliberate clink, saving Cressida from answering. Mr. Thewlis cleared his throat. "The entry in Lord Eldmere's household account book is irregular. A payment to Reverend N. Bell may be innocent. The phrase special license arrangement is plausible, though imprecise. Private performance is not a term I have ever seen used for a lawful marriage ceremony." The room seemed to shrink around those two words again. "Then what was I?" Cressida asked. No one answered at once. That was kinder than a lie and crueler than certainty. Mr. Thewlis folded his hands. "We do not yet know. I will need the parish register, the license record, and the identity of the officiating clergyman. Until then, no conclusion should be spoken as fact. But if there is no record," her voice sounded almost detached from her body, "if the ceremony was not lawfully performed or recorded, then there may have been fraud, and I may not be his wife." The words came out quietly. Once spoken, they filled the room. She had imagined freedom before, in small, childish ways, during the first year of marriage. When Godfrey left for London, and she still thought absence was a wound that might heal if he returned with kindness. Later, freedom had become too dangerous to imagine. Now it stood near her like a stranger whose face she could not see. The Duke crossed to the writing desk, opened a drawer, and removed a clean white handkerchief. He brought it no closer than the edge of the table. "Your hand," he said. Cressida looked down and realized she had gripped the arm of the chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles. He did not take her fingers. He did not assume the right. He placed the handkerchief within reach and stepped back. That restraint nearly undid her more than touch might have done. She picked it up herself. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me for cloth." The faint dryness in his voice might have been humor if either of them had remembered how to use it. Cressida pressed the handkerchief once to her palm. "I am not certain what one thanks a duke, for when he has removed her from one scandal and seated her before another. You may wait until I have done something useful." The Dowager gave him a look. For once, Leopold has said something sensible. A brief silence followed, softer than the others. Cressida almost smiled. It did not fully form, but the attempt reminded her that her face belonged to her. Then a servant entered with a salver. "A letter, Your Grace, from Eldmere Park, delivered by express rider." The Duke took it, glanced at the direction, and did not break the seal. Instead, he looked at Cressida. "It is addressed to me, but its contents almost certainly concern you. Shall I read it aloud, or would you prefer Mr. Thewlis to open it first?" Another choice. This one hurt because it was ordinary and should never have felt rare. "Mr. Thewlis," she said. The solicitor opened the letter. His mouth tightened as he read. "Lord Eldmere states that Lady Eldmere departed his house in a state of agitation, having removed household property and placed herself under improper influence. He says, unless she returns by tomorrow evening, he will be forced to inform the county that her nerves have rendered her unsafe in society. The dowager's cup struck its saucer. The Duke did not move. That stillness was terrible. "Safe," Cressida repeated. There it was, the cage being rebuilt from a distance. Not iron, not chains, reputation. She looked at the account book, at the old ink, at the line that might contain the beginning of her undoing or the first proof of Godfrey's. "If I return," she said, "he buries the question." "Yes," Mr. Thellis said. "If I do not, he buries me." The Duke's voice came low. "Not while I have breath and standing." Cressida turned to him. "Your Grace, standing can shelter a person. It can also cast a shadow." His expression changed, and for the first time she saw something personal behind the ducal discipline. Pain, old enough to have manners. "My mother was destroyed by a rumor," he said. The dowager looked down. The words had cost him. Cressida felt it, though she did not yet understand it. "I learned young that society will call a woman unstable when it cannot afford to call a man dishonorable. I will not pretend the danger is small." He paused. "But his crime, if there is one, is not your shame." Her fingers closed around the handkerchief. Not his hand, not yet, only the cloth he had offered and not forced upon her. "Then I will not go back until truth commands me," she said. Not fear, not Godfrey, not gossip. The Duke bowed his head once, as if receiving an oath rather than a declaration. Before anyone could answer, another servant appeared at the threshold, carrying a small sealed packet wrapped in brown paper. "For Lady Eldmere," he said, "from Lord Eldmere's groom." Cressida knew before she touched it. Some knowledge arrived through the skin. Mr. Thewlis slit the string at her nod and unfolded the paper. The plain gold ring inside was not on her finger. For one impossible moment, her hand flew to her own left hand and found only flesh, bare and tender, because at some point during the questioning had twisted the band free without realizing it and laid it beside her teacup. The packet held that same ring, or what had been that ring minutes before. Bent, forced out of round, the engraving inside caught the light, warped but legible. CP to GW, April 1811. No proper church mark, no maker's second stamp. Nothing but initials, a date and damage. Beneath it lay Godfrey's note. "Since Lady Eldmere discards her vows so easily, I return the symbol in its truest shape." Cressida did not cry. The room waited for collapse, and she denied it that satisfaction. She looked at the bent circle on the table, then at the Duke. "Now," she said, her voice almost calm, "we have something useful." For 3 breaths after the packet opened, no one in the Havenholt drawing-room moved. Cressida stared at the bent gold circle on the table as if it had learned to travel faster than a carriage, faster than logic, faster than any ordinary cruelty. Then Mr. Thewlis, whose profession had made suspicion almost a courtesy, lifted one hand. No one touch either ring. The word either struck Cressida through the fog. She looked down. Beside her teacup lay the ring she had twisted from her finger, without knowing it, round, warm from her skin, marked faintly by 5 years of wear. In the opened packet lay another ring, bent almost flat at one side, its engraving imitating the same initials and date. CP to GW, April 1811. Not the original then, not the living circle that had bitten her hand through breakfast and flight. A copy. A damaged accusation sent to make her doubt even the object she had carried on her own body. The discovery should have steadied her. Instead, it made the room tilt. If Godfrey could send a false ring with such confidence, what else had he prepared in duplicate? What other proof had been made, bent, hidden, or arranged before she ever knew she needed to defend herself? The Duke of Alderwick did not reach for her. He had learned, or perhaps always known, that rescue could become another form of possession when offered too quickly. He merely moved the nearest chair a little closer with his foot, not toward himself, but toward her. "Sit, Lady Cressida," his voice was low, "before strength becomes performance." She obeyed, because the words did not command her pride to disappear. They named its cost. Dowager Lady Armitage rang for more tea and ordered the servant who entered to bring sealing wax, clean paper, and the small evidence tray from the library. She did not ask why such a tray existed in a ducal household. Cressida suspected every old house had one, though most families called it something prettier. Mr. Tholis placed the round ring and the bent ring apart upon white paper. "Lady Cressida, will you permit me to examine the ring you removed from your hand?" "Yes." The answer was quick, too quick. She slowed herself. "Yes, Mr. Tholis, I give permission." The solicitor bowed as if she had granted more than an inspection. He turned the round ring with a paper knife, never with bare fingers. "This is worn on the lower curve. The inner engraving is shallow, but naturally softened. The date appears old." He turned to the bent ring from the packet. "This engraving is deeper, newer. The letters imitate age. But the cut is too clean within the bend. Whoever sent this wished us to believe Lord Eldmere had damaged the actual wedding ring after Lady Cressida discarded it." "I did not discard anything," Cressida said. The words came out colder than she expected. "I removed it because I could no longer breathe with it on my hand while people discussed whether my life was lawful." The Duke looked at her then, and in his gaze she saw no shock at her sharpness, only attention. It reached toward her without touching. "Then that is how it will be written." Mr. Tholis dipped his pen. "Dictate it yourself, my lady." Cressida's throat tightened. "Myself?" "Yes," the solicitor said. "No one's phrasing should stand where yours will do." For a moment she could not speak. 5 years of being translated by men had made her own voice feel like contraband. She looked at the account book. She looked at the 2 rings. Then she sat straighter. On the morning after Mrs. Isolde Carow was brought into Eldmere Park and placed in rooms proper to the wife of the house, Lord Godfrey Winstanley ordered me before witnesses to remove my wedding ring, saying it gave a false impression. I refused. His Grace, the Duke of Alderwick, entered before Lord Eldmere touched my hand. Later, at Havenholt Abbey, while speaking with Mr. Tholis and Dowager Lady Armitage, I removed the ring myself and placed it beside my teacup. The packet delivered from Eldmere Park contained a separate bent ring, engraved to resemble mine, with a note implying I had discarded my vows. Her voice faltered only at the final word. Vows, such a holy word for Annette. The Duke's hand moved upon the back of the chair, then stilled. "Continue only if you wish. I wish to finish." She drew breath. "I state that the bent ring is not the ring I wore from April 1811 until this day." Mr. Tholis wrote every word. Dowager Lady Armitage set her cup down with quiet approval. Good. The single word warmed Cressida more than praise, because it judged the act, not the wound. The Duke crossed to the table at last. He did not look at the false ring first. He looked at the reddened mark where the true band had lived on Cressida's finger. She saw him see it, not the scandal, not the possible invalidity, the small human injury, hidden beneath a symbol everyone else had argued over. His expression changed so slightly, another person might have missed it. But Cressida had survived years by reading shifts in a man's face. This was anger, not the hot, theatrical anger Godfrey used to rearrange blame, a contained anger that made room for judgment. "Does it pain you?" he asked. She almost said no. It was what wives said in houses where comfort was counted as trouble. Then she stopped. "Yes," she said. "A little." He opened his palm. "Nothing more, no demand, no reach. The true ring may remain with you, or Mr. Thewlis may hold it with the statement. The choice is yours." The simple shape of his hand unsettled her. It waited. Men had held out hands to her before, but usually to lead, to display, to receive obedience. This hand asked nothing until she placed something in it. Cressida picked up the true ring. It was warm still, as if reluctant to become evidence. For a moment, she remembered the chapel and the girl she had been, searching the inside engraving for tenderness. Then she remembered Godfrey at breakfast, saying false impression while Isolde watched. She placed the ring into the Duke's open palm. Her fingertips rested there for the briefest instant, skin against the warmth of his hand. He did not close his fingers. He did not trap hers beneath gratitude. He waited until she withdrew. Only then did he fold his hand around the ring, not like a man taking possession of a woman's token, but like a witness accepting a burden. The room seemed unbearably quiet. Cressida felt the contact echo up her arm, not as romance, not as impropriety, but as the first touch in years that had not asked her to become smaller. "For the evidence tray," she said, because she needed ordinary words before her breath betrayed her. "For the evidence tray," he agreed. Dowager Lady Armitage's gaze softened, though she politely looked toward the window. Mr. Thewlis cleared his throat and labelled the packet. Original ring removed voluntarily by Lady Cressida at Havenholt. Bent imitation ring sent from Eldmere Park. Godfrey's note enclosed. The phrase steadied the world. Original, imitation, note enclosed. When pain became inventory, it could no longer roam unchallenged. Before the wax had cooled on the evidence paper, a second letter arrived. This one came not by groom, but by a liveried servant from Lady Eldmere, Godfrey's mother, who had not set foot at Eldmere Park in 3 years, yet had never surrendered the belief that the family name was hers to defend. The Dowager read the direction and gave a dry little sound. "Lady Eldmere writes to me as one matriarch to another. That is rarely a Christian beginning." She broke the seal. Her mouth hardened. She states that Lady Cressida has long suffered from excessive sensibility, that Mrs. Carow has been misrepresented by jealous imagination, and that unless this household ceases to shelter domestic rebellion, she will make certain every drawing-room from Winchester to London understands. Lady Cressida abandoned her husband to pursue ducal attention. Cressida felt the words strike less sharply than they might have the day before. Perhaps shock had limits. Perhaps shame did. "Ducal attention," she repeated. "Is that what honor becomes when a duke witnesses too much?" "Often," Leopold said, "people rename a woman's danger when they dislike the man who noticed it." The Dowager looked at him. "You are being unusually concise today. I am conserving my temper." "Do." Cressida looked from mother to son and caught, for the first time, the shape of a household where rebuke did not always mean cruelty. The discovery was strangely intimate. It revealed more of Leopold than any compliment would have done. He had been raised beneath a woman who corrected power to its face. Perhaps that was why he knew how to step back from it. Mr. Thewlis folded Lady Eldmere's letter into a new paper. "This will be preserved as reputation pressure. It also confirms that Lord Eldmere's family intends to frame Lady Cressida as unstable and improper. Then we answer before they define the story," the Duke said. Cressida looked up. "No." He stilled. The room stilled with him. "No? Not before I have decided what answer bears my name. For one dangerous second, She wondered whether she had offended him. Then Leopold inclined his head. Quite right. 2 words. No resentment. No correction. A small tremor moved through her. Not fear this time, but something unaccustomed and therefore almost frightening. He had been contradicted and had not punished the contradiction. Cressida turned to Mr. Tholis. Can a copy be made of my statement? Several. 1 for your file, 1 for her grace, 1 sealed for me, and 1, if his grace permits, held with the rings. But no letter will be sent to Lord Eldmere saying, I am grateful for protection or sorry for confusion. What shall it say? The Dowager asked. Cressida looked at the bent imitation ring. Then at the mark on her finger. It shall say that I remain at Havenholt Abbey under respectable chaperonage, while the validity of the 1811 ceremony is examined. It shall say I have not abandoned duty, but I will not be returned by threat. It shall say the rings have been preserved. The Duke watched her as if every sentence revised something he had expected of wounded women. And the final line? He asked. Cressida's mouth went dry. She understood he was not leading her. He was inviting the blade. The final line shall say, a vow taken without freedom is not love. Mr. Tholis looked up. Dowager Lady Armitage went very still. The Duke did not speak for several heartbeats. Then he placed the true ring, sealed in paper, into the tray beside the bent imitation. That line, he said quietly, may prove more dangerous than the evidence. Then perhaps the evidence will need courage beside it. His eyes met hers. For the first time since Eldmere, Cressida did not look away because a man's gaze demanded something. She held it because this one did not. By late afternoon, the first whisper had already left Hampshire. A maid's cousin had told a groom. A groom had told a farrier's wife, who had a sister in Winchester, had improved the tale before tea. Lady Eldmere had fled her husband's house. Lady Eldmere had taken household papers. Lady Eldmere had thrown away her ring and placed herself beneath a duke's protection. In Mayfair, by supper, some would say she had laughed as she left. Others would say she had wept in his arms. Neither would be true. Truth, Cressida was beginning to learn, needed not only witnesses but guardians. At dusk, Mr. Tholis returned from the library with a troubled face and ink on his fingers. Your Grace, my lady, I have sent an inquiry to the Hampshire parish, but there is already one irregularity in the copy abstract kept among Lord Eldmere's debt papers. Cressida rose. What irregularity? He held out a narrow sheet. The chapel ledger for April 1811 appears to have been referenced once, and then never again. The abstract notes a leaf removed for repair. The Duke's eyes darkened. A parish register leaf, so it says. Cressida heard the old chapel again, the damp stone, the watch ticking in Godfrey's hand, the clergyman whose name no one had spoken clearly. Her finger throbbed where the ring had been. The pain no longer felt like proof of belonging. It felt like a place where a question had finally entered the skin. Mr. Tholis lowered the page. The record for the week of your ceremony may have 1 page cut out. Cressida looked at the evidence tray, where the true ring and false bent ring lay apart under cooling wax. 1 circle had held her. 1 had been sent to break her. Somewhere, perhaps, a missing page had done both. Then we find the page, she said, or we find who needed it gone. The road back toward Hampshire did not forgive memory. It drew Cressida through hedgerows, silvered with spring dust, past fields where lambs moved like torn clouds, past coaching inns whose painted signs creaked above yards filled with gossip, and every mile carried her nearer to the girl. She had been at 17. She sat in Dowager Lady Armitage's travelling carriage with her gloved hands folded over a reticule that held no ring, no promise, no proof except the copy of her own statement sealed beneath Mr. Tholis's hand. The true ring and the bent imitation remained at Havenholt Abbey, locked in the evidence tray inside the Duke's library, under Mr. Tholis's seal and the Dowager's key. That absence mattered. Cressida felt it as one felt the missing weight of a tooth after pain had ended. Strange, raw, impossible to ignore. The Duke of Alderwick rode ahead for the first hour with 2 outriders, then dropped back when the road narrowed near a stand of beech trees, keeping near enough for safety and far enough that no passing farmer might weave a tale of intimacy from a protective journey. He had argued against her travelling at first, but not as Godfrey would have done. He had not said she was too delicate, too emotional, too much trouble. He had said the parish road passed close to Eldmere land, and Godfrey's men might watch it. Cressida had answered, "Then let them watch me, going toward the truth." After a silence, he had bowed his head and ordered the carriage prepared. They reached the market town near dusk and stayed at an inn respectable enough to offend no one and plain enough not to invite curiosity. The Dowager took the chamber adjoining Cressida's, and her maid slept on a pallet by the door. The Duke and his steward occupied rooms on the other side of the landing, separated by servants, propriety, and the entire weight of English custom. Yet when Cressida woke before dawn to the sound of wheels in the yard and opened her curtain, she saw him below, standing in the grey light with a folded map in hand, speaking quietly to his steward. He looked up once, as if he had felt rather than heard the movement above. Cressida stepped back before her face could be clearly seen. It was foolish to feel steadied by being noticed from a distance. It was also true. By noon the next day, they reached the village near Eldmere Chapel. The church stood beyond a low stone wall, modest and damp at the edges, with yew trees dark against the pale sky. Cressida had not seen it since the ceremony. Her first sight of the pointed doorway struck so hard that she almost forgot to breathe. Not because the place was grand. It was not. Because it was ordinary. A girl's life had been bent inside a room no larger than a tenant's dairy, and the stones had gone on being stones. The Duke dismounted before the carriage and opened the door himself, but did not extend his hand immediately. "The step is uneven," he said. "Will you allow assistance?" Such a careful question, such an impossible kindness. Cressida looked at the muddy ground, then at the eyes of 2 women, leaving the churchyard with baskets on their arms. Already the village had seen enough to speak of. Let them speak accurately. "Yes, Your Grace." She placed her gloved hand in his. The contact lasted only long enough for her to descend. Leather against leather, practical and public, no more than courtesy. Yet she felt the steadiness of his hand, the strength held in check, and the exact instant he released her once her boots found the ground. Not abandonment, respect. "Thank you," she said. "You needn't thank me for a carriage step. You have said something like that before." "Then I am becoming predictable." "No," Cressida said, surprising herself. "Only consistent." His gaze held hers for a heartbeat. Not long. Long enough for warmth to rise where fear had been. The Dowager's cane struck the ground behind them, crisp as punctuation. "If you 2 have finished redefining manners, I should like to interrogate a vicar before dinner." The vicar, Reverend Sallow, was a thin man with anxious eyebrows and ink on his cuffs. He had come to the parish in 1813, 2 years after Cressida's ceremony, and knew nothing of Reverend N. Bell, except that no such name appeared among ordained clergy in the parish records. The register for April 1811 had indeed been damaged, he said, and one leaf had been removed before his tenure. He spoke with the pained caution of a man who feared both scandal and bishops. Mr. Alder, the Duke's steward, copied what records remained. The blank where a page should have been looked obscene, not dramatic, not even ragged in an honest way. Neatly cut, a clean absence. Cressida stood before it with her hands clasped and felt anger arrive like a candle taking flame. Someone did not tear this in panic, she said. No, the Duke answered from behind her. Someone had time. Reverend Sallow swallowed. The former clerk died in 1814. His widow may remember something, but she is easily alarmed. Mrs. Ellery? Cressida asked. The vicar blinked. You know her? She was nurse to my mother for a time. She helped me dress after the ceremony. The memory returned with sudden sharpness. A woman's roughened fingers fastening Cressida's cloak, whispering, "Poor lamb," before Godfrey told her the carriage was waiting. Mrs. Ellery lived in a cottage at the far end of the village, with lavender by the door and a cracked blue jug on the sill. She looked older than Cressida expected, and frightened before a word was spoken. Her eyes went first to the Duke, then to the Dowager, then to Cressida's bare left hand. "My lady," she said, and curtsied so deeply she nearly lost balance. Cressida stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Please don't be afraid. I came to ask what you remember, not to punish you for surviving it." The old woman's mouth trembled. "I always thought you were too young to look so quiet." That undid something in Cressida more than cruelty would have done. She sat because the cottage was small and standing above Mrs. Ellery felt wrong. The Duke remained near the door, hat in hand, making himself less large by sheer discipline. The Dowager took the second chair and pretended not to notice that it wobbled. "There was a clergyman," Cressida said. "Do you remember him?" Mrs. Ellery twisted her apron. "I remember the voice, not a parson's voice. Too smooth, like a man reading grief from a playbill. He called himself Bell. But old Mr. Frey, the clerk, said afterward he had never seen him take a service. Lord Eldmere gave him coin in the vestry. I saw the purse." The Duke's eyes sharpened. "You saw Lord Eldmere pay him?" "Aye, your grace. Gold, not parish money. And there was a paper with a red edge, Mr. Frey said it was to make all proper, but he would not look me in the face." Cressida's hands chilled. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Mrs. Ellery's eyes filled. "Your mother tried." The cottage seemed to go utterly still. Even the small fire lowered its voice. "My mother. She wrote a letter that morning. She was too ill to come. She asked me to see whether the register was shown to you. She said no daughter of hers should be married in a corner without record." Cressida felt the room tilt again, but this time she stayed upright. "What happened to the letter?" Mrs. Ellery looked down. "Lord Eldmere took it from the tray before it reached you. I saw him," he said. "Dying women make confusion where men have made arrangements." The Duke moved then, only one step, but the floorboard answered. His face was controlled almost past humanity. "Mrs. Ellery," he said, "do you still have any proof of this?" The old woman hesitated. Fear returned, practical and poor. "If I speak, I lose my cottage." Cressida leaned forward. "No." Her voice was gentle, but it did not yield. "If truth costs you shelter, then the first wrong will have learned to steal twice. I won't allow my freedom to be purchased with your fear." Mrs. Ellery stared at her. Perhaps she had expected a lady to demand loyalty. She had not expected one to offer protection. "There may be a scrap," the old woman whispered. "Your mother wrote 2 pages. Lord Eldmere took the letter, but the blotting sheet remained. Mr. Frey kept it because the words pressed through. After he died, his widow gave me his papers to burn. I couldn't burn that." She rose slowly and took a small tin from beneath the hearth brick. From it she drew a folded sheet, faint with reversed impressions. The words were not fully legible, but one line showed clear beneath the slant of old ink. "Unless my daughter sees the register." Cressida did not touch it. She had learned. "Mr. Alder," the Duke said quietly from the door, "send for Mr. Thouless. This must be sealed before it travels." A shadow moved beyond the cottage window. The Duke saw it first. His gaze flicked once to his outrider outside, who was already crossing the lane. A man in Eldmere livery turned away too quickly beside the far hedge. Godfrey's men, then, watching, waiting. The truth had acquired witnesses on both sides. Cressida should have been afraid. She was afraid. Her heart beat high in her throat, and her bare ring finger throbbed, as if remembering the shape of its prison. But Mrs. Ellery held the blotting sheet with shaking hands, and the old woman had been afraid for 5 years too. Cressida stood. "Seal it," she said, "and write my name on the packet as the person who requested it." The Duke looked at her. "That may draw his anger more directly. It already has." "Yes." He paused. In that pause, the cold Duke became something more difficult to name. "I have spent years mistrusting need. Yours does not repel me." The words were quiet enough that only she, the dowager, and perhaps the fire heard them. Cressida met his eyes. There was no flirtation in it, no claim, only a truth laid down carefully between danger and duty. "I am afraid," she said, "but I am not returning." "Then we go forward," he answered. Outside, the Eldmere man vanished down the lane, carrying news back to the house that had tried to erase her. Inside the cottage, under poor light, an old blotting sheet waited to become a voice. By the time the rumor reached Mayfair, it had learned to dress better than truth. It arrived in silk, repeated behind fans, carried across supper tables by women who had never seen Eldmere Park and men who owed Godfrey money but called it friendship. Lady Cressida had fled her husband. Lady Cressida had placed herself beneath the Duke of Alderwick for reasons too delicate to name. Lady Cressida had imagined a mistress where there was only a guest, a threat where there was only household correction, a wound where there was only marriage. Cressida heard the first version before she even entered Lady Waverton's evening gathering, because a footman in the hall turned too quickly at the sight of her bare left hand. The ring mark had faded from angry red to a pale groove, but it was still there beneath her glove. The true ring and the bent imitation remained locked at Havenholt Abbey under Mr. Thouless' seal. The blotting sheet from Mrs. Ellery's cottage had been sealed separately and sent by trusted rider to the solicitor. Reverend Sallow had agreed to make a written statement about the missing parish leaf. None of that was ready to be spoken publicly. Godfrey knew it. That was why he had come to London first. Dowager Lady Armitage stood at Cressida's side, her black silk gown severe enough to rebuke the chandeliers. The Duke of Alderwick stood 3 paces behind and slightly to the left, not so close as to make the whispers easy, not so far as to allow anyone to pretend Cressida had come unguarded. "You may still choose to leave," the dowager said quietly. "No," Cressida answered. "If I let them invent my absence, they will call it proof." The dowager's mouth softened for half a second, then walked slowly. People dislike dignity most when they have prepared pity. Cressida walked into the drawing-room as if she had not once been 17 and frightened before a damp chapel wall. She walked as if her name had weight, even if the law had not yet decided its shape. Conversation thinned, faces turned. Lady Waverton, plump, powdered and terrified of being on the wrong side of a scandal before it had selected a winner, came forward with a smile strained nearly transparent. "Lady Eldmere, how unexpected." "Not entirely," the Duke said. "I accepted your card 3 days ago." Lady Waverton coloured. "Of course, London post does make everything feel sudden." Cressida inclined her head and did not rescue her. Across the room, near the pianoforte, Godfrey stood with a glass in hand and Mrs. Isolde Caro beside him. Isolde wore pale green and a small gold ring on a chain at her throat. It was not the bent imitation from the packet. It was another copy, bright, round, and ostentatiously displayed. Cressida recognized the maneuver at once. Godfrey meant to make symbols multiply until no one could tell which one mattered. Isolde touched the chain as if unaware of it. Her eyes met Cressida's and smiled. "My dear Lady Eldmere," she said, her voice carrying just enough to summon attention. "How relieved we are to see you well. Lord Eldmere has been so anxious." Godfrey set down his glass. Naturally, when a wife leaves her house in agitation, with household papers in her keeping, concern is unavoidable. The word concern moved through the room like smoke. Concern was more dangerous than accusation. It allowed cruelty to wear gloves. Cressida stopped before him, neither near enough for intimacy nor far enough for flight. "Then I am pleased to relieve you of it. I am well." "Are you?" Godfrey asked softly. "You have placed yourself in strange company." The Duke's shoulders shifted, but he did not speak. Cressida felt the restraint behind her like a drawn curtain. "I am in respectable company," she said. "Dowager Lady Armitage is kind enough to receive me." Isolde gave a light laugh. Kindness can be so easily abused by those who need an audience. A murmur passed near the mantel. Godfrey drew a folded paper from his coat. Cressida's stomach tightened, but her face did not change. "Since my wife has chosen publicity," he said, "perhaps she will permit clarity." This note was written in her own hand, begging release from duties that had become too heavy for her nerves. I refused to expose it. I had hoped to protect her. The word protect nearly broke through her composure. Nearly. He opened the paper. "My lord, I can no longer sustain the appearance required of me. I beg you to release me from a position I entered without comprehension and now dishonor by my instability." A woman near the sofa whispered, "Poor creature." The Duke's hand closed once at his side. Cressida heard the faint pull of his glove leather. She also heard, more importantly, the wrongness in the sentence. It was not merely false. It was almost her. That made it uglier. The phrasing borrowed her restraint, then bent it toward shame. Godfrey held out the note for the nearest gentleman to inspect. "You see why I feared distress had overcome her." Cressida looked at the paper, then at his face. "If I am mad, why did you fear my records?" The room went still. Godfrey's smile thinned. "What records?" "The household account book you forbade me to remove. The page showing payment to Reverend N. Bell. The phrase private performance beside the date of my ceremony." Someone drew in a sharp breath. Isolde's fingers tightened on the ring chain. Godfrey recovered with admirable speed. "There, you hear it. She has fixed upon account entries she does not understand and built persecution from bookkeeping. Bookkeeping has ruined better lives than yours," the Duke said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room cleanly. Godfrey turned. "And you, Your Grace, have encouraged a vulnerable woman to make a spectacle of herself." "No," Cressida said before the Duke could answer. "He has not encouraged me. He has listened. There is a difference men often resent." Lady Waverton's fan stopped moving. The Duke did not step before her. He remained where he was, and because he remained, The room was forced to look at Cressida while she spoke. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it beneath her stays. But her voice stayed level. "That note is not mine." Godfrey lifted his brows. "Your hand is recognizable. It is a good imitation. Convenient. Not good enough." She extended her hand toward the paper. "May I?" Godfrey hesitated. That hesitation did more damage than refusal. He gave it to her only because the room had seen him pause. Cressida held the note without trembling. Her own handwriting stared back, or something dressed in its bones. She had learned letters under her mother's eye, formed every capital C with a small open upper curve, because Lady Penhaligon had once said a closed C looked like a mouth, refusing truth. This note's capital C was tight, almost pinched, the curve sealed against itself. She showed it to Lady Waverton. "The capital C is wrong." A gentleman gave a small, incredulous laugh. "Madam, many people form a letter differently under distress." Cressida looked at him. "I have been under distress for 5 years. My handwriting remained faithful when my household did not." The line fell harder than she expected. Even the man looked away. Isolde smiled too late. How very poetic. The Duke's gaze moved from the note to Isolde's writing case on a small table near the pianoforte. It was green Morocco leather, open just enough to show cream paper edged faintly in gilt. His eyes narrowed. Cressida saw the direction of his attention and understood that he had noticed what she had not yet dared to claim. The note's paper was not from Eldmere's study. It matched Isolde's stationery, but that proof could not be seized publicly without care. "Lord Eldmere," the Duke said, "this note will be examined. By your solicitor, by anyone with eyes and less investment in your comfort." Godfrey's face darkened. "You have no right to take what belongs to me." A forged statement used before witnesses to damage a woman's reputation does not belong to the man who presents it. It belongs to the inquiry it creates. Isolde stepped forward, her smile gone brittle. "This is absurd. Lady Eldmere is jealous, and everyone can see why. She cannot bear that her marriage was a disappointment. So she invents mysteries to make neglect seem criminal." Cressida turned to her. "Madam, if neglect were the crime, I would not need invention." Silence struck. Not polite silence. The other kind. The kind that comes when a room realizes the woman it expected to pity has brought a knife made of exact words. Godfrey leaned close enough that only she and perhaps the Duke could hear. "You are destroying yourself." "No," she said quietly. "I am becoming difficult to destroy." His eyes flashed. For 1 second, she saw what he wished to do if no one were watching. Not violence, perhaps. Worse in its own way, removal, confinement, a declaration from physicians and family that she was too delicate to appear. Then the Duke moved, 1 step only, and Godfrey stepped back as if rank had touched his shoulder. The gathering did not end in triumph. Scandal never did. It ended in fragments, whispers, women pretending to admire the lamps, men suddenly remembering carriages. The forged note was not surrendered, but the Duke's groom saw which pocket Godfrey placed it in. Isolde closed her writing case with a trembling snap. Cressida left with the Dowager on one side, and the Duke behind her, her legs steady until the house door closed. Only in the carriage did the air change. The Dowager sat opposite, eyes bright with anger. "Well," she said, "London is not improved by lighting." Cressida almost laughed, but the sound failed. The carriage rolled forward. Darkness pressed against the glass. For a while, no one spoke. Then Leopold, seated across from Cressida beside the Dowager's shadow, removed one glove slowly and laid his bare hand palm up on the space between them. He did not reach across. He did not command comfort. He offered it as he offered choices, with room for refusal. "You need not take it," he said. "I know." Her own voice sounded far away. "That is why I can." She placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed only after hers settled, careful and warm through the kid leather. She meant to hold it for a moment, only a moment, enough to prove she could accept steadiness without debt. But the carriage turned into the darker street, and her hand remained in his. 1 minute passed, then another. Her fingers tightened. His answered, not possessive, not triumphant, simply there. "I wanted to strike him," he said at last, each word low and controlled. "I did not, because you deserved justice, not another man's violence." Cressida looked at their joined hands. "Thank you for not making my pain into your temper. I am trying to learn the difference." The confession was not dramatic, but it was real. It moved through her more deeply than any gallant speech could have done. Outside, London rattled on, fed by rumour and wheels and lamplight. Inside the carriage, Cressida held the Duke's hand until they reached Havenholt House in town, and for the first time since the ring had left her finger, the emptiness there did not feel entirely like loss. By morning, the warmth of the carriage handclasp had become the most dangerous evidence Cressida possessed, because, unlike rings, letters, and copied paper, it could not be sealed away in Mr. Tholis's box. It lived beneath her glove. It returned when she reached for her teacup, when she passed the library door, when she saw the Duke of Alderwick's handwriting on a folded note beside the breakfast tray, and felt her pulse answer before her judgment could rebuke it. Havenholt House in London had slept badly. Servants moved with the careful quiet of a household that had heard too much scandal in one evening. The dowager read 3 gossip sheets before breakfast and placed each one face down, as if even ink might learn manners if denied attention. Mr. Tholis had sent 2 clerks in different directions before dawn, one toward Bath to inquire into any actor, clerk, or dismissed curate, calling himself Nathaniel Bell, and one toward Hampshire to secure Reverend Sallow's statement about the missing parish leaf. The true ring and the bent imitation had been brought from Havenholt Abbey to the London house overnight in a locked dispatch case under seal. The case now sat in the Duke's study, untouched, except in the presence of Mr. Tholis. Cressida knew all of this because the dowager told her plainly. That was one of the strange mercies of Havenholt. Facts were not rationed to her like sugar in a sick room. Yet, near noon, facts began to move behind doors again. Cressida noticed first, because the house became too courteous. A footman who usually asked whether she preferred tea or chocolate merely bowed and vanished. Mr. Tholis passed the drawing-room with papers pressed under his arm and did not meet her eyes. The Duke, who had appeared at breakfast every morning since she entered his protection, did not appear at all. Cressida sat with the forged note from the previous night copied before her. She studied the wrong capital C until the shape seemed to breathe. Then she noticed the phrasing. "I can no longer sustain the appearance required of me." Required. Not a word she used often. Isolde had used it at dinner at Eldmere Park. Arrangements require a hostess. Position requires grace. Comfort requires taste. Cressida dipped her pen and wrote Mrs. Isolde Carow beside the phrase, not as proof, not yet but as a thread. It was while sanding the ink that she heard Godfrey's voice through the partly closed library door. Not loud. Godfrey was never loud when he believed victory depended upon appearing reasonable. "You are a practical man, Alderwick. Send her back quietly. I will remove Mrs. Carow from Eldmere Park for the season. I will call it a misunderstanding." You may continue your inquiry without making my wife a public ruin." Cressida stopped breathing. The Duke's reply was lower. "You are generous with what is not yours to grant. Her name is mine. Her name is under question. Her reputation is not yet, but keep her here. Drag parish pages and servant women into drawing rooms. And even if you prove some irregularity, what will she be then? A woman who lived 5 years under a man's roof without lawful claim. Do you think London will reward her for being deceived? It will undress her with sympathy?" Silence. Cressida stood. The copied note slipped from her lap to the carpet. Godfrey continued, softer now, more dangerous for it. "You know I am right. Send her back to Eldmere under terms. Mrs. Carrow leaves. Lady Eldmere resumes her place while your solicitor examines whatever clerical nonsense you have found. If the marriage stands, she is spared scandal. If it fails, she is spared the worst of it, because she was under my roof, not yours." The Duke said nothing. That silence struck Cressida harder than refusal would have done. She stepped into the corridor. The library door had not been fully latched. Through the narrow opening she saw Godfrey near the desk, immaculate in grey, his gloves in one hand. The Duke stood by the mantel, one arm braced there, his face turned partly from view. "You tried to strip a ring from her hand before a mistress," Leopold said at last. "And you think I would trust your roof? Trust is not required. Strategy is." "No," the word came, and for one moment Cressida's heart steadied. Then the Duke added, "She would not return as your wife, in fact. She would return under written protections, with my steward in the house, the dowager's companion attending her, and no access granted to Mrs. Carrow. Your household would be watched. Your accounts would remain open." Godfrey smiled. "A cage with ducal ribbons is still acceptable if society calls it reconciliation." Cressida pushed the door open. Both men turned. For the first time since she had known him, Leopold looked caught. Not guilty in the manner of a villain. Worse, guilty in the manner of a man who had meant to save her and forgotten to ask whether she wished to survive in the shape he chose. Godfrey's smile widened. "Cressida, you should not stand in corridors. It lends itself to misunderstanding. I have understood enough." Her voice sounded calm because shock had frozen it there. She looked at the Duke, not at Godfrey. Godfrey no longer had the power to surprise her. "You were arranging my return." Leopold stepped away from the mantel. "I was refusing his terms after improving them." His jaw tightened. "I was testing how far he would expose his own motive." "In another room?" "Yes." The admission was immediate. It did not heal anything. "You asked me to trust you, then arranged my life in another room." Godfrey made a soft sound of satisfaction. "You see? Her nerves turn even allies into enemies." Cressida did not look at him. "Leave." Godfrey blinked. "This is not your house." "No, but it is not yours either, and you have used enough rooms today." The Duke's voice cut in. "Lord Eldmere, you will go." Godfrey examined them both, pleased by the fracture he had made. "As you wish. I shall tell my mother that Lady Eldmere prefers a duke's temper to a husband's patience." "Tell her the truth, if you can bear the novelty," Cressida said. His face hardened, but he bowed and left with the elegance of a man carrying poison in a silver cup. When the front door closed below, silence rose between Cressida and Leopold. It was not the silence of the carriage. It had no warmth in it. "I did not intend to send you back," he said. "You intended to decide how near I should stand to the door of my prison. I intended to prevent society from destroying you before the evidence was secure." Godfrey said that too, in different words. He flinched. It was small. She was glad it hurt. The gladness ashamed her, but not enough to unsay the truth. Lady Cressida, do not. The title from him had become both respect and distance. Today it felt like a curtain drawn too quickly. Do not make your voice gentle and call that restoration. He lowered his hand. She had not realized he had lifted it, not to touch, perhaps only to plead. He let it fall without protest. That mattered. It did not mend. You are right, he said. I should have called you in. No, you should have begun with me. The difference landed. She saw it in his eyes. Cressida bent and picked up the copied, forged note from the carpet because her hands needed a task that belonged to her. The wrong capital C stared up again, pinched shut. Isolde's phrasing, Isolde's paper, Isolde's careful sweetness rotting at the edge. I will be in the Dowager's sitting room, Cressida said. Please don't follow me. He inclined his head slowly, as if receiving sentence. I won't. There was no challenge, no wounded pride demanding immediate pardon. He moved aside so she could pass. The courtesy almost broke her, because it proved he could respect a boundary, even while having failed to respect a decision. She went upstairs to the Dowager, who opened the sitting room door before Cressida knocked and took one look at her face. Ah, the older woman said, my son has behaved like a duke instead of a man. Cressida pressed the forged note copy into her hands. I need ink, quiet, and every sample of Mrs. Caro's hand that can be found. The Dowager's eyes sharpened. Good. Rage is more useful when given employment. For the rest of the day, Cressida did not see Leopold. She heard his voice once in the hall and heard it stop. When a servant must have told him, she remained with the Dowager. He did not send flowers. He did not send apology by paper, which she would have hated. He sent, through Mr. Thewlis, a packet containing Isolde's dinner card from Lady Waverton's gathering, obtained by a footman who had saved it from the salver. Nothing written with it. No demand for gratitude. Cressida laid it beside the forged note. The same tight capital C appeared in Caro. The same long tail appeared on the letter Y. Proof did not yet stand, but it had begun to rise. At dusk, she stood at the sitting-room window and saw Leopold in the square below, speaking with a messenger fresh from the road. The messenger handed him a small Bath playbill and a clerk's memorandum. Even from above, Cressida saw the change in his posture. He looked up toward her window, then stopped himself halfway. He did not raise the paper. He did not summon her. He turned instead toward the house, carrying the news through proper channels because she had told him not to come. Cressida rested her bare left hand against the curtain. Trust, she was learning, could be wounded without being killed. But if it lived, it would not live because a duke protected it. It would live because he learned to ask before he acted, and because she refused to be grateful for any rescue that required her disappearance. The next morning, Cressida returned to Havenholt Abbey with the Dowager. The copied forged note, Isolde's dinner card, the Bath playbill, and a silence she had chosen for herself. London had become too crowded with whispers, and Mr. Thewlis required the deeper library at the Abbey to secure the evidence before the next move. The true ring and the bent imitation travelled in the locked dispatch case under his hand. The blotting sheet from Mrs. Ellery's cottage arrived an hour later, sealed and shaken from the road, followed by Reverend Sallow's signed statement that the April 1811 register leaf had been cut before his tenure. By noon, the house seemed to hold not scandal but breath. Cressida did not ask for Leopold. He did not come. That restraint settled over the day like weather. It did not absolve him. It did keep the wound from widening. She worked with the Dowager in the small sitting room, comparing Isolde's hand to the forged note until the letters became less like shapes and more like habits. The tight capital C, the overlong tail on the letter Y. The elegant pressure at the beginning of certain words, as if the writer always wished to enter a page already admired. By late afternoon, Mr. Tholis entered with a paper from Bath and ink still damp on his fingers. "Nathaniel Bell," he said, laying it before Cressida first. "Not the Dowager, not Reverend Bell. He appears in a Bath playbill as Nathaniel Bell, actor. Dismissed from the Crescent Theatre Company in March 1811 after a dispute over debts. A lodging-keeper's memorandum places him near Hampshire in April of that year." Cressida read the name until the letters steadied. Actor, not clergyman, a man trained to speak sacred words as performance. The old account entry returned with dreadful precision. Private performance. "Does this prove it?" she asked. Tholis did not insult her with comfort. "It proves that the man may not have been ordained. It does not yet prove Lord Eldmere knowingly arranged a false ceremony. For that, we need the missing page, the license trail, or a witness willing to say money was paid for deception. Mrs. Ellery saw a purse. Yes, her statement matters. So does the blotting sheet. But a public inquiry will be attacked unless every piece is placed carefully." The Dowager tapped her cane once against the carpet. "Then we place it carefully and publicly. Godfrey has already chosen public poison." A servant entered before anyone could answer. "My lady, His Grace asks whether Lady Cressida would permit him 10 minutes in the chapel. Dowager Lady Armitage is invited to remain within sight." Cressida's hand stilled on the Bath paper. The wording had Leopold in it. Permit. 10 minutes, within sight. He had not sent command, wrapped in apology. He had sent structure around her refusal, so refusal could still stand if she needed it. The Dowager watched her over the rim of her spectacles. "You owe him nothing." "I know. Good. Women too often call debt by softer names." Cressida folded the Bath paper once. "I will hear him." Havenholt's chapel stood at the east side of the house, small enough for private prayers, and old enough to make even anger lower its voice. Late light entered through narrow windows and fell across worn stone, touching the pews, the brass rail, the open register set beneath linen. The Dowager remained near the rear, close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to grant truth room. Leopold stood in the aisle, hatless, his dark coat severe, his face more tired than Cressida had seen it. He did not come toward her when she entered. He waited until she had chosen where to stand. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Don't thank me yet." No, he accepted that. "I have an apology to make, and I will make it plainly." Cressida folded her hands before her. Her left ring finger was bare. The pale groove remained. "Plainly would be new enough to interest me." Pain crossed his face, and this time she did not regret causing it. "I decided without you. I told myself I was drawing Godfrey out, that I was measuring the danger, that I was trying to prevent society from devouring the very woman it had helped him silence. All of that may be partly true. It is not the whole truth." He drew breath. "The whole truth is that I was afraid. Afraid that proof would come too late. Afraid that one more whisper would make you impossible to restore. Afraid because I have seen rumor ruin a woman who had done nothing but stand too near a man's selfishness. My fear made me act as if your freedom were a fragile object I could carry better than you." The chapel seemed to deepen around those words. Cressida thought of his mother, the old wound he had named only once. She thought of her own mother's letter, stolen before it could reach her. Fear had shaped many rooms in their lives. It did not excuse who had been locked inside them. You made safety sound like mission, she said. Yes. You made a plan in which I was the person moved. Yes. You did what Godfrey did, but with cleaner gloves. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was no defense in his gaze. Yes. That single word struck harder than explanation. Cressida had expected resistance. Men defended themselves as naturally as breathing. Leopold did not. He stood in the aisle of his own chapel and let the accusation remain where she placed it. I am sorry, he said. Not because you discovered it, not because it wounded what little trust you had given me. I am sorry because it was wrong. I will not ask you to forgive it now. I will not make protection a claim. From this moment, every document, every witness, every confrontation, and every public step will be placed in your hands first. I may advise. I may stand where you authorize. I may use my name only when you permit it. If you choose another protector, another solicitor, or no duke at all, I will still send the evidence forward. Cressida felt the breath leave her slowly, not in surrender, in recognition. And if I choose public inquiry, she asked, then I stand beside you, not before you. Even if it stains your name, it would improve mine to be stained by truth. That nearly broke through the last of her anger. She looked away toward the altar rail where generations of Armitages had knelt in certainty. I do not want to be saved into another version of silence. I know that now. Do you? He did not answer quickly. When he did, his voice was lower. I am learning it from you. The words were not polished enough to be strategy. That made them dangerous. Cressida looked back at him. Mr. Thulis says Nathaniel Bell was an actor. Yes. Godfrey is hosting an assembly at Eldmere Park with Mrs. Carrow as hostess. A messenger brought the notice an hour ago. Then he means to crown her in my rooms before the county and force the world to choose which woman appears sane. Leopold's jaw tightened. Yes, good, Cressida said. His eyes sharpened. Good? A private lie hides. A public lie performs. Performances can fail before witnesses. For the first time in 2 days, something like fierce admiration moved openly across his face. He did not call it beautiful. He did not call it brave. He simply said, "What do you authorize?" The question entered her like light through a high window. We prepare an inquiry. We invite the vicar, Mr. Tholis, Mrs. Ellery, if she will come safely, and enough county witnesses that Godfrey cannot call it domestic confusion. I will return to Eldmere Park as witness, not wife. You may accompany me. You may prevent him from touching me. You may not answer questions directed at me unless I look to you. Agreed. And if I falter, his voice softened, then I wait until you decide whether you need silence, water, a chair, or a hand. She looked at his hands then, remembering the carriage, remembering how warmth could comfort and frighten. You may ask, she said. You may not assume. I will ask. The space between them changed, not erased, changed. He had not stepped closer, but something in Cressida did. She was tired of holding herself as if dignity required being untouched by comfort. She took one step forward. He went utterly still. Leopold, she said, the name coming with difficulty because names were intimate even when hands were not. May I have comfort without debt? His voice was rough when he answered. Yes, then ask me. His eyes held hers. May I hold you only for comfort? Cressida crossed the last space herself. She placed her hands against the front of his coat, felt him breathe once, as if restraint had become a physical ache, and leaned into his embrace. His arms came around her, slowly, carefully, stopping the moment she settled, rather than pulling her closer than she had chosen. It was not possession. It was shelter with doors. For several breaths, she stood there in the chapel aisle, while the dowager looked firmly at a stained glass window and pretended to study St. Michael. Cressida let herself be held. Then, because she could, she held him back. When she stepped away, he released her at once. His eyes were bright with words he did not speak. She was grateful he did not speak them yet. Some truths needed the law cleared from beneath them before they could stand without shame. Footsteps hurried outside the chapel. A footman appeared at the threshold, pale from haste. "Your Grace, my lady." "A messenger from Hampshire. Mrs. Carrow has been seen at Eldmere Park wearing Lady Cressida's copied ring at the assembly rehearsal." Cressida turned toward the door, no longer trembling. "Then she has brought the false proof into the light for us." Leopold did not reach for her. He waited. Cressida looked at him and extended her hand, not for holding, but for the documents he carried. "Let us begin." Eldmere Park received Lady Cressida as if the house had rehearsed contempt and found it inadequate for the occasion. Every window blazed with assembly candles. Every carriage lamp in the forecourt shone upon gravel she had crossed at 17 as a bride, and every servant at the door looked at her bare left hand before training pulled their eyes away. She had chosen plain ivory gloves for that reason. Let the absence be seen only when she decided it should be seen. The true ring and the bent imitation had not travelled with her in careless pockets or trembling hands. They were sealed in Mr. Tholis's evidence case, which rode in the carriage behind hers with the solicitor, the copied statement, the Bath playbill naming Nathaniel Bell as an actor, Reverend Sallow's account of the missing parish leaf, Mrs. Ellery's sealed blotting sheet, and the forged note comparisons. Nothing unique existed twice without its story. Nothing would be handed to Godfrey's fire. Dowager Lady Armitage sat beside Cressida until the carriage stopped, black silk severe against the lamplight. "Remember," she said, "you enter as witness, not as supplicant." Cressida looked through the glass at the front steps, where Godfrey had once allowed her to stand alone in her travelling cloak, while his steward explained which rooms she was permitted to use. "No," she said, "I enter as myself. Witness is only the first thing they will understand." The door opened. Leopold stood below, hat in hand, his face controlled in the bright scatter of lamps. He did not reach in. He had learned the shape of her choices and now waited for them. "The step is high," he said. "May I assist you?" Cressida looked past him. Godfrey stood in the doorway above, polished and pale. Beside him, Mrs. Isolde Carrow wore emerald silk and the copied ring on a gold chain at her throat, bright as a small, false sun. Behind them, clustered county neighbours, old friends of the Winstanleys, women who had accepted Cressida's quiet dinners for years. Without once asking whether quiet had been demanded of her, Cressida extended her hand. "Yes, Your Grace." His gloved fingers took hers just long enough to help her descend, then released. The propriety of it was flawless. The trust inside it was not visible to anyone else, and that made it more precious. The dowager descended after her, leaning upon her cane like a magistrate disguised as a grandmother. Mr. Tholis's carriage rolled into place behind them. Only then did Cressida step forward. She did not wait for Leopold to lead. She entered Eldmere Park first. The hall had been rearranged for triumph. Flowers filled the urns. Musicians tuned in the distant ballroom. A footman Cressida had once protected from dismissal now stood with a rigid face beside a silver tray. She saw his eyes flick toward the East Suite staircase, and knew Isolde had already made a ceremony of occupying rooms that were not hers. Godfrey bowed. Lady Eldmere, how gratifying that reason has brought you home. Reason brought me, Cressida answered. Home is still under examination. A murmur passed behind him. Isolde touched the ring at her throat. How dramatic. We had hoped for peace tonight. No, Cressida said. You had hoped for surrender with music. The Duke came to stand at her right, slightly behind the line of her shoulder, near enough to intervene if Godfrey tried to touch her. Far enough that her voice remained the first thing the room met. Godfrey's smile tightened. You see what has become of her, Your Grace. Every ordinary kindness is turned into an accusation. Then ordinary kindness should consider behaving less like theft, Leopold said. Cressida glanced at him, not because she needed rescue, but because his restraint had obeyed the line she had drawn in the chapel. He did not continue. He had given one blade to clear space, then stepped back into silence. Godfrey gestured toward the ballroom. The county is assembled. I will not have a private domestic confusion made into vulgar entertainment. Neither will I, Cressida said. That is why Mr. Thewlis has been invited to present documents in the drawing-room after supper, before selected witnesses whose names have already been provided to your steward. Godfrey's face changed, only briefly enough. My steward received no such list. From behind Cressida, Mr. Thewlis spoke. He signed for it at 4 o'clock, my lord. The footman by the tray lowered his eyes too late to hide satisfaction. Isolde laughed softly. How very legal. I confess I prefer a waltz to parchment. Then you should not have worn parchment's imitation around your neck, Cressida said. Isolde's fingers tightened over the copied ring. This, her voice brightened for the listeners, Lord Eldmere gave it to me for amusement. A trifle copied from an old family pattern. No, Cressida said, not a family pattern. A copy of the ring he tried to remove from my hand before witnesses. Godfrey stepped forward. Enough. His hand reached toward her arm. It did not land. Leopold moved between them with such swift restraint that no one could call it violence, and no one could mistake the warning. You will not touch her. Godfrey looked past him. Cressida, call off your champion before you make yourself ridiculous. Cressida removed her left glove, slowly. The gesture silenced more people than a shout would have done. Her bare hand emerged without a ring. The pale groove remained at the base of her finger, visible under the chandeliers. I need no champion to show an empty hand. Isolde's smile sharpened. Without a ring, what are you? There it was. The question Godfrey had meant the whole county to ask. Cressida lifted her bare hand higher, not as shame, but as evidence of survival, a woman no longer willing to wear an unanswered question. The room stilled. She turned toward Isolde. The ring you wear is not mine. It is not even the bent imitation Lord Eldmere sent to Havenholt with a note accusing me of discarding vows. It is a cleaner copy, made to confuse the first, but copies fail in small places. The original engraving has an irregular space after the initials. CP to GW, April 1811. The letter G leans left because the engraver slipped. The false ring sent to us copies the words too sharply, but not the where. The ring on your chain has corrected the leaning G entirely. Isolde looked down before she could stop herself. That look convicted more quickly than confession. Cressida let the silence settle. She did not rush to fill it. Godfrey's eyes flicked toward the staircase, then the drawing room, measuring exits, witnesses, losses. This is absurd, he said. My wife has become obsessed with trinkets. Then come to the drawing room, Cressida said. If they are trinkets, they will fail to trouble you. A ripple moved through the hall. No one wanted to miss the fall of a woman, and fewer still wanted to miss the fall of a man who had arranged one. Godfrey saw the appetite shifting. That was when fear became visible in him, not fear of guilt, perhaps, fear of losing authorship. Isolde leaned close to him and whispered something Cressida could not hear. Leopold heard enough to turn his head, but he did not speak over Cressida. "The drawing-room is not prepared," Godfrey said. "It will be," Cressida answered. "Mrs. Vale knows how to prepare a room for truth. She has been preparing them for lies long enough." From the servants' line, Mrs. Vale appeared, pale but upright. "The drawing-room is ready, my lady. My lady. Not as habit, as choice." Cressida felt the words travel through her more deeply than applause ever could. She drew a breath and looked at Leopold. He waited. She remembered the chapel, his apology, his promise to stand where she permitted. Before all of them, before Godfrey, before Isolde, before the county that had watched her disappear politely for years, Cressida placed her hand upon the Duke's offered arm, not because she needed to lean, because she chose where alliance would be seen. His body went still for one heartbeat, as if the trust had struck him harder than insult. Then he steadied beneath her touch. No flourish, no claim. Partnership made visible. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, for her alone, and yet not hidden, "I stand where you permit me to stand. Beside me," she said, "not before me. Beside you." Together they crossed the hall toward the drawing-room. Cressida first by half a step, the Duke beside her, the Dowager following with her cane, and Mr. Thellis behind them, carrying the sealed case. The assembly guest parted. Some looked ashamed, some merely hungry for scandal. Cressida did not grant them either version of herself. At the drawing-room threshold, Mr. Tholis's clerk came in from the side passage, breathless from the road, holding a flat packet sealed in parish wax. He bowed to Cressida, not to Godfrey. "My lady, Reverend Sallow sends this by hand. The missing chapel page has been recovered from old Clerk Frey's papers. It is torn but legible." Godfrey made the smallest sound. It was not anger. It was the first crack of panic. Cressida looked at the closed packet, then at the room waiting beyond. "Then let every person who pitied me be seated," she said. "They are about to learn what pity tried to bury." The drawing-room at Eldmere Park had once taught Cressida how to disappear beautifully. Tonight it had been arranged to teach everyone else how disappearance was done. Chairs stood in a half-circle rather than in conversational clusters. The long mahogany table had been drawn forward from the wall and cleared of flowers. Upon it Mr. Tholis placed the sealed evidence case, the recovered parish packet, and a clean sheet on which each item would be named before it was opened. Nothing lay loose. Nothing could be slipped into a pocket or called a misunderstanding. The county witnesses entered with the faces of people who had come expecting scandal and found procedure waiting instead. Lady Waverton sat near the Dowager, rigid with discomfort. Reverend Sallow stood beside the vicar from Eldmere's neighbouring parish, both men pale beneath the candles. Mrs. Ellery had not travelled, for her fear was still too practical to be shamed. But her sealed statement and the blotting sheet, bearing Cressida's mother's words, rested under parish wax. Godfrey remained by the mantel, one hand upon the marble shelf, every line of him composed into injured dignity. Isolde sat near the pianoforte, with the copied ring still at her throat, though her fingers had stopped touching it. Leopold stood beside Cressida's chair, not behind it like an owner, and not before it like a shield. When she sat, he sat only after she gave the smallest nod. That nod, more than his title, steadied the room. Mr. Tholis began. "At Lady Cressida's request, and under the authority of witnesses present, we will examine whether the ceremony of April 1811 was lawfully recorded, whether Lord Eldmere's subsequent actions relied upon that ceremony, and whether certain documents and objects have been created or altered to influence reputation. "This is absurd," Godfrey said. "My wife's distress has been indulged until it fancies itself a court." Cressida looked at him. "No court would meet in your drawing-room, my lord. This is only where the lie began to feel safe." A sound moved through the chairs, not quite approval, not quite shock. Mr. Thewlis broke the parish seal, the recovered leaf from the chapel ledger, located among the papers of the late clerk, Mr. Frey, and forwarded by Reverend Sallow. He unfolded the page with care. The paper had been torn along one edge, but the writing across it remained legible. Entries for the week of April 1811. Baptism, burial, morning prayer. No marriage of Lady Cressida Penhaligon to Lord Godfrey Winstanley appears here. Silence landed with such force that even Godfrey's breathing seemed impertinent. Cressida felt the room tilt toward her, not with pity this time, but with the first crude shape of belief. It did not comfort. Belief, arriving late, still stepped over years of damage to reach her. Godfrey laughed once. "A missing entry proves clerical neglect, not conspiracy." "Agreed," Mr. Thewlis said. "Alone, it proves absence." He opened the next paper. "But the household account book of Eldmere Park records payment to Reverend N. Bell, special license arrangement, private performance, dated the same week. A copy has been made and the original page witnessed. The Duke's steward placed the copied account entry where 3 gentlemen could read it." Godfrey's face tightened. "Household phrasing. Servants write imprecisely." Cressida answered before Leopold could. "I wrote that book for 5 years. Servants do not call a marriage a performance unless someone has taught the household to see it as one." Mr. Thewlis opened the Bath playbill and the lodging memorandum. Nathaniel Bell, actor, dismissed from the Crescent Theatre Company in March 1811. Recorded near Hampshire in April. No evidence has yet been found that he was ordained. Reverend Sallow cleared his throat. "No Reverend Bell appears in our clerical lists." Isolde shifted. The ring on her throat flashed. Godfrey turned on the vicar. "You know nothing before your appointment." "No," Reverend Sallow said, trembling but audible. "That is why the missing page disturbed me." Cressida lowered her hand beneath the edge of the table. Leopold's hand was not there. He had not presumed. For a moment, she wanted the steadiness of the carriage, the chapel, the warmth without debt. Then she remembered what she had told him. Ask, do not assume. She let her fingers move toward him. Not quite touching, he saw. His hand opened beneath the table's shadow, palm upward. She placed her gloved fingers there for one brief, deliberate squeeze, not to hide. To gather force, he answered once and released when she withdrew to speak. No one saw, or if the dowager did, she was too wise to admit it. Mr. Thewlis lifted the blotting sheet. Statement of Mrs. Ellery, former attendant to Lady Penhaligon, and a blotting sheet preserved from the late Lady Penhaligon's letter. The visible impression reads, "Unless my daughter sees the register." Cressida heard her mother across 5 years. Not in a full letter, not in an embrace, in the pressure of ink that had refused to vanish. She stood. "My mother tried to warn me. Lord Eldmere took that letter before it reached my hand." Godfrey's voice went low. "You cannot prove that." "No," she said. "Mrs. Ellery can testify that she saw you take it. If you wish to call an old woman a liar before the county, do so clearly." He did not. That refusal, like every hesitation before it, found its place in the room. Isolde stood abruptly. All of this proves Lord Eldmere wished a private marriage and badly kept records. It proves nothing about me, though Lady Cressida seems determined to drag my name through every paper she can't understand. Cressida turned toward her. Then let us speak of papers you do understand. Mr. Thewlis placed the forged note upon the table, beside Isolde's dinner card from Lady Waverton's gathering. The note produced in Mayfair, allegedly by Lady Cressida, shares distinctive letter formation with Mrs. Carrow's known hand. The capital C is tightly closed. The tail of the letter W extends in the same manner. The paper resembles that of Mrs. Carrow's green morocco writing case, witnessed open at Lady Waverton's gathering. Isolde's mouth trembled, then hardened. Many ladies use similar paper. Yes, Cressida said. Few use it to write my surrender. Godfrey crossed the room in 2 strides. Enough. I will not allow my house to be turned into a theatre by a woman who forgets she lived under my roof by consent. Leopold rose. He did not step before Cressida. He stood beside her. You will not threaten her. Threaten? Godfrey's smile returned, thin and vile. I need only publish what this room has nearly proved. 5 years under my roof. 5 years answering to my name. If no marriage stood beneath it, what name shall the county give her then? Victim? Perhaps in whispers. In print, they will choose another word. The room recoiled from the ugliness, but no one contradicted it quickly enough. That delay was the true face of society. Cressida felt it, cold and familiar. Then she realized she was not cold with fear. She was cold with judgment. You mistake my shame, she said. I was 17. I was deceived. If you made a false ceremony to take my dowry and use my name, the disgrace is not that I lived beneath your roof. The disgrace is that every respectable person in this room found it easier to believe I was unstable than to ask why you feared a register. Godfrey's mask cracked. You knew enough. The words slipped out before he could polish them. Isolde gasped. Leopold's head turned slowly. Mr. Thewlis lifted his pen. My lord, will you repeat that? Godfrey's face went white. I said nothing. Isolde's panic overcame calculation. You told me she wouldn't fight if the ring confused things. You said the clergyman was dead or gone, and the page was safe. The confession did not arrive nobly. It came because fear finally outran ambition. Isolde clapped a hand over her mouth too late. The copied ring swung at her throat. Everyone saw it. Godfrey stared at her with open hatred. You stupid woman. Leopold's voice cut through the room. There. At last, something honest. Mr. Thewlis wrote quickly. Cressida did not sit. She looked from Isolde to Godfrey and felt the old life begin, not to heal, but to separate from her skin. Pain remained. So did proof. Godfrey reached toward the chain at Isolde's throat, not to harm her, but to snatch away the object that had betrayed them both. Isolde stumbled back. The copied ring snapped loose and fell to the carpet near the hearth. Godfrey seized it and turned toward the fire with a sudden, desperate motion. Trinkets, he said harshly. That is all any of this is. Cressida did not move. She knew where the true ring was. She knew where the bent imitation was. Sealed, named, safe. Burn it if you like, she said. That one was always pretending. Godfrey froze with the false ring in his fist, and for the first time, the whole room understood that he no longer knew which evidence he controlled. Godfrey stood before the hearth with the copied ring in his fist, and the firelight turned his face into something older than anger. It showed the fear beneath it. The drawing-room did not breathe. Every guest, every servant near the door, every witness around the long table watched the same impossible scene. A viscount who had spent years arranging silence, now holding a false symbol, he knew, longer knew how to use. "Burn it," Cressida said again, her voice calm enough to make the command sound like permission. "That ring never held me." Godfrey's hand tightened. For one wild moment, he seemed ready to throw it into the flames, simply to prove he still possessed the power to destroy something. Then Mr. Tholis opened the evidence case with a sharp click that carried farther than any shout. "The original ring remains sealed here," he said. "The bent imitation sent from Eldmere Park remains sealed here. The ring in Lord Eldmere's hand is the third object worn tonight by Mrs. Carrow. If he burns it, he burns only another copy and adds destruction of relevant evidence before witnesses." The words struck like hammer blows. Original, bent imitation, third object. Cressida saw understanding pass from face to face. Godfrey had multiplied rings to confuse truth, but truth had answered by naming each one. Leopold stood beside her, still as judgment, though she could feel the effort it cost him not to seize the moment for himself. He had promised to stand beside, not before. He kept that promise while Godfrey's world collapsed under its own cleverness. Isolde rose from her chair, pale beneath the powder. "I didn't know all of it," she said. "I didn't." Godfrey turned on her. "Be silent." "No." The word tore out of her, half panic, half self-preservation. "You told me the ceremony was irregular, not false. You said the girl had been bought with her father's consent and would never dare question the register. You said the clergyman was gone, the page was safe, and the ring would make everyone remember what you wished them to remember." The room erupted at last, not loudly, but in that dangerous rustle of silk, breath, and scandal-finding structure. Mr. Tholis wrote quickly. Reverend Sallow closed his eyes, as if praying for the parish and dreading the bishop. Lady Waverton looked as though she would give up gossip forever, or at least until morning. Godfrey's mouth whitened. "She lies to save herself." "Partly," Cressida said, "but this time her lie has run into the truth." She stepped toward the table. Leopold moved with her, one measured pace, close enough that if Godfrey reached again, he would meet rank before skin. Cressida did not look to him for words. She had her own. "Open the original ring packet, Mr. Tholis." The solicitor glanced at her. "My lady, once opened, it must be resealed before witnesses." "Then let them witness." He broke the seal. The true ring lay in its folded paper, the gold worn thin at the underside, the engraving softened by years against her hand. "CP to GW, April 1811. The leaning G remained. Beside it, Mr. Tholis placed the bent imitation from the packet, newer engraving cut too sharply within the damage. Then, after Godfrey's hand slackened, and the copied chain ring was taken by the Duke's steward, the third circle lay beside the other two, brighter, cleaner, falsely perfect. 3 rings. 1 life, 1 fraud. "There," Cressida said. "That is what he did. He made a ceremony without truth, a marriage without record, a wife without protection, and then he made copies of the only symbol he thought I would fear losing." Godfrey made a sound of contempt, but it had no room to stand. "You lived well enough." Cressida faced him fully. "I lived quietly enough to be useful to you. Do not mistake my survival for your mercy." The dowager's cane struck once against the floor. "Mr. Tholis, record that." Mr. Tholis did. Godfrey looked from the solicitor to the guests, and seemed to realize that the authority of the room had moved elsewhere without asking him. He turned to Cressida, and the hatred in his eyes was naked now. "If you were deceived, then you were nothing here. A few months earlier, that sentence might have opened a pit beneath her. Tonight it found no ground." Cressida placed her bare left hand on the table beside the rings. The pale groove still marked her finger, but it no longer looked like an emptiness. It looked like proof that gold could be removed and a woman remain. "I was 17, she said. "I was deceived. I will not be ashamed of another person's fraud." No one spoke. She continued, because silence had served men long enough. "If the ceremony was false, then you used my youth, my father's debts, my mother's illness, and the name of marriage to take money and obedience. If the ceremony was lawful, but hidden by negligence, then you still used secrecy to humiliate me. There is no version in which your honor survives mine." Leopold's breath shifted beside her. She did not look at him, but she knew he heard the girl of 17 leaving the room at last. Mr. Tholis rose. "The matter will be referred to the bishop's office regarding the false clergyman, and to appropriate legal counsel regarding fraud, dowry settlement, and extortionate threats. Lord Eldmere's creditors will also be informed that certain securities attached to the 1811 arrangement may be disputed." Godfrey's face changed more at the word creditors than at the word fraud. That, too, the room saw. Isolde sank into her chair as if her bones had loosened. "I will give a statement," she whispered. "I want that recorded. I don't want to be made the only villain in a plan I didn't invent." "You will give a statement," the dowager said coldly, "and then you will leave this house by a door that remembers shame." Isolde looked at Cressida then, and for the first time there was no triumph in her face. Not apology, not yet. Only the bewilderment of someone who had believed she was stepping over a discarded woman and discovered a person beneath her foot. "I hated that you had the name," Isolde said. "I know," Cressida answered, "but you were never entitled to take mine." The assembly guests began to understand their role. Men who had laughed at Godfrey's version of concern now avoided his eyes. Women who had pitied Cressida found their pity an ugly thing to hold. Lady Waverton rose, trembling. "Lady Cressida?" I repeated what I should have questioned. "Yes," Cressida said. The honesty startled them both. "You did," Lady Waverton swallowed. "I am sorry." "Then when you repeat this night, repeat that first." Outside the drawing room, the music had stopped. News had reached the ballroom before judgment had finished, as news always did in houses made of doors. Godfrey moved toward the exit, but Leopold stepped into his path. Not roughly, not dramatically, simply enough. "You will remain until Mr. Tholis has your acknowledgement of the objects presented. You cannot imprison me." "No, but I can ensure every man holding your paper hears you refuse to sign before witnesses." Godfrey looked past him and saw, perhaps for the first time, the terrible practical power of a duke who had chosen not violence but consequence. He signed. His hand shook once. Cressida saw it and felt no pleasure, only release. When the witnesses began to disperse, the room did not cheer. It was better that way. Applause would have made a spectacle of pain. Instead, people moved quietly, carrying away the burden of having been present when a woman refused to carry their shame for them. Mr. Tholis resealed the 3 rings separately. The original returned to its packet. The bent imitation was marked as Godfrey's false accusation. The 3rd ring was marked as the Caro copy. Cressida watched until every seal cooled. Only then did she let herself leave the drawing room. Leopold followed no farther than the chapel corridor until she stopped beneath the narrow window where moonlight lay across the stones. "You owe me nothing," he said. "Not gratitude, not forgiveness for my errors. Not affection, because I stood where I should have stood from the beginning." Cressida turned to him. The night had taken the ducal severity from his face and left the man beneath it, weary, controlled, afraid of asking too much. "I know. If you wish to go to the dowager, I will send her. Leopold, his name stilled him. She stepped closer of her own will. Tonight I am not being sent anywhere. His eyes lowered to her mouth for one unguarded instant, then rose again, disciplined and almost pained. May I kiss you, Cressida? The question opened a door no one had locked. She felt the answer in her whole body before she spoke it, but she spoke it because choice deserved a voice. Yes, because I wish it. He touched her cheek with such care that the tenderness of it nearly broke her. Then he kissed her, softly, reverently, no claim pressed beyond what she gave. Cressida answered by lifting her hand to his coat and leaning into the kiss for one brief, certain moment. When they parted, nothing in her felt taken. Something felt returned. Leopold rested his forehead near hers, not quite touching until she allowed it with a small tilt forward. I love you, he said, the words rough with restraint. Not because you needed saving, but because you taught me what courage looks like. Cressida closed her eyes. The old ring, the false rings, the copied vows, the missing page. All of them seemed suddenly far down a corridor she had walked out of. And I love you, Leopold, she whispered, not because you claimed me, but because you gave me back my choice. He breathed once, deeply, as if the words had undone and remade him. Cressida stepped back only enough to look at him fully. Tomorrow there will be papers, bishops, creditors, and apologies badly made. Yes, tonight there is one more thing. She returned to the drawing-room table, where Mr. Tholis had not yet removed the evidence case. With his permission, she took up the sealed packet holding the old ring. She did not open it. She did not need to. I do not want to wear survival, she said. I want to live. Then she placed the packet back into the case and closed the lid herself. Several months later, when Cressida stood once more before a chapel register, no one hurried her hand. That, more than the flowers, more than the morning light, more than the quiet gathering of witnesses in Havenholt Abbey's small east chapel, nearly undid her. The register lay open upon a linen-covered table, its pages clean, its ink fresh, its purpose unmistakable. Reverend Sallow had travelled from Hampshire at her request, not to perform the ceremony, but to stand among those who had helped restore the truth his parish had once failed to protect. Mr. Tholis stood beside him with the grave satisfaction of a man who had seen evidence survive, fire, gossip, and gentlemen. Dowager Lady Armitage sat in the front pew, black silk exchanged for deep violet, her cane resting across her lap like a retired weapon. Mrs. Ellery sat behind her, hands folded so tightly that Cressida crossed to her before anything began, and placed a gentle kiss upon the old woman's cheek. My mother would have thanked you, Cressida whispered. Mrs. Ellery's eyes filled. Then I can sleep easier, my lady. So can I. The months between Eldmere and this morning had not been gentle, but they had been honest. The bishop's office had confirmed that Nathaniel Bell had never been ordained. The special license had been found altered in Lord Eldmere's papers, its seal lifted from another matter and reapplied with clumsy heat. Sir Ranulph Penhaligon had written once, then twice, asking to see his daughter, and explained that poverty had pressed him harder than judgment should. Cressida had answered on good paper, with no anger she could not defend. She wrote that desperation explained weakness, but it did not sanctify it. If he wished to know her again, he would begin by naming what he had allowed. He had not replied. Not yet. Godfrey's creditors moved more quickly than repentance. Eldmere Park, once so polished in its cruelty, became a house of closed shutters, disputed ledgers, and cancelled invitations. Lord Godfrey Winstanley withdrew from Hampshire before the summer ended, officially for health, privately because no table received him without remembering the 3 rings. Mrs. Isolde Carew left first, carrying fewer trunks than she had brought, and none labelled for rooms that belonged to another woman. Her statement had been useful. It had not made her innocent. Cressida had not needed to see either of them ruined in spectacle. It was enough that consequence had found addresses society could no longer ignore. Yet restoration, she learned, was not the same as applause. Letters came. Some were awkward, some florid, some so careful to pity her that they managed to wound twice. Lady Waverton's apology was the best because it was plain. I repeated what I had not questioned. I am ashamed. Cressida kept that one. The others she answered only if they named the harm. Leopold had never asked for reward during those months. He had asked to call. He had asked to walk with her in the South Garden, under the Dowager's amused supervision. He had asked whether she wished to speak of evidence or roses, or nothing at all. Once, when a London paper implied that the Duke of Alderwick's chivalry would soon repair Lady Cressida's name by marriage, he placed the paper before her and said, "I will deny it if you wish." "Denny the marriage?" she asked. "Not hurt, only watching. Denny that my name repairs yours. If we marry, it will be because you choose me, not because society enjoys arranging damaged things near titles." That was the day she began to believe happiness could have discipline. Now, in the chapel, Leopold stood beside the register in dark mourning dress, severe and pale, with feeling he did not try to disguise. He looked less like a duke awaiting a bride than a man waiting to be trusted with an ordinary miracle. When Cressida approached, he did not reach for her hand until she extended it. Then he took it openly, carefully, and held it before the register where every witness could see the difference between possession and consent. The ring he would place upon her finger was plain gold, as she had chosen, but its inside bore only 2 words. By choice, she had seen the engraving before the ceremony. Leopold had insisted on it. No hidden inscriptions, he had said. No surprises inside a vow. She had laughed then, softly, and with more love than laughter could hold. Reverend Armitage, a cousin of the Duke's family, performed the ceremony with clear voice and no haste. When the question came, Cressida answered, without searching any face for permission, "I will." Leopold's answer followed, rougher, lower, as if the words had crossed a long distance through him before finding air. "I will." After the ring slid onto her finger, Cressida looked at her hand. No old groove remained visible now. Skin healed slowly, then all at once. Mr. Thulis placed the register before her. "Lady Cressida Penhaligon," he said gently, giving her the name that had survived beneath all others. She signed it first. Slowly, fully, every letter open. Leopold signed beneath her, not over her line, not crowding it, and when the witnesses added their names, the page became what the stolen one had never been: visible, lawful, shared. Only then did Cressida allow herself to breathe like a woman who had reached shore. Outside the chapel, the doors stood open to the late summer garden. No one hurried them toward breakfast. No one rearranged the moment into performance. Leopold offered his arm, and Cressida took his hand instead, twining her fingers through his with the public confidence of a wife who had not been placed but had arrived. The dowager saw and pretended to examine the weather. "A handsome morning," she said. "Try not to make it sentimental." "I wouldn't dare," Leopold said. "You would," Cressida replied, "only privately." His eyes warmed. In the garden, beneath a lime tree bright with bees, he stopped where the chapel path curved toward the house. "Are you happy?" he asked. Yes, she considered, not because everything is mended. Some things are not meant to vanish. But they no longer command the room. He touched her hand, thumb brushing once over the new ring, then stilling in question. She smiled and lifted his hand to her cheek. You may. His breath caught, and the tenderness in his face answered before words did. I love you, Cressida. I love you, Leopold. She said it easily now, not because love had become smaller, but because fear no longer stood in front of it. He bent his head, waiting until she rose slightly toward him, and kissed her beneath the lime leaves. It was brief, warm, and full of the kind of promise that did not need witnesses to become true. Later, in a small room off the library, Cressida placed the old evidence box where sunlight could touch it without making it holy. Inside lay her mother's blotting sheet, Godfrey's note, the copied ring from Isolde's chain, the bent imitation from Eldmere, and the original ring she had worn for 5 years. She did not destroy it. Destruction would have given it too much drama. Instead, she laid it in velvet beside the words, unless my daughter sees the register, and closed the lid. The box would remain at Havenholt, not as a shrine to suffering, but as proof for any young woman who came to her new fund, seeking help against a marriage arranged in secrecy, haste, or fear. In the months ahead, Cressida would receive such women in a blue sitting room of her own choosing, with open ledgers, honest witnesses, and tea poured before questions. But that morning she left the box closed and returned to the chapel path where Leopold waited, not impatient, not possessive, only present. Ready? He asked. Cressida looked back once at the chapel door. It stood open. No one guarded it. No one pushed her through. She walked first into the light, her husband beside her, not leading, not claiming, but chosen.